Just, can you hear? Can you hear me? So
Yeah,
just as an aside, I can't actually read if people put uh, messages in the chat. It's just too small for my glasses. So,
that's okay. We're
okay,
about to start, so you should mute, Ellen.
okay.
Before we begin, we have want to let everyone know we have Spanish interpretation and live captioning available. For interpretation, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the bar of the Zoom screen.
Para los que desean escuchar toda la presentación y el simposio en español, entonces les invitamos a buscar el globo, el icono del globo abajo en la pantalla de Zoom. Entonces, al hacer clic en ese mundito o ese globo, podrán seleccionar el idioma de español. Gracias.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for making today's symposium. I am Christopher Schneiders, Director of the Sachs Institute for Mental Health Law, Policy, and Ethics at the USC Gould School of Law. I have a few brief housekeeping notes before we begin. First, these Zoom sessions are being recorded and will be posted online. There will be a few breaks in the action as well, a 10-minute break before the 11 a.m. presentation and 5 minutes at 11:25, and a 15-minute break at noon to give you an opportunity to grab some food before the afternoon presentations, and another 10-minute break before our final session at 1 p.m. Please note that there will be a Q&A session that we're hosting next Thursday, May 13th, focused on our symposium's discussion today of PADS and SDM. More details to come soon. And although today's format will not include formal Q&As, please use the Zoom chat feature. We will be monitoring the chat and expect to address questions next week. And now I will turn things over to Andrew Guzman, Dean of the USC Gould School of Law and the Carl Mason Franklin Chair in Law. Andrew?
Apologies for that, the mute button got me. Welcome everybody and hello. I hope you are well and that your loved ones are well and that you're staying safe. On behalf of the USC Gould School of Law, I'm delighted to welcome you to our 11th annual Sachs Institute Spring Symposium. We're so delighted to be resuming this tradition. As some of you know, last year's event, which was to be on immigration, asylum, and mental health, was canceled as the pandemic emerged. This year, with the pandemic still with us, we're thrilled to be able to offer our first ever virtual symposium. And this year, we're addressing psychiatric advance directives and the importance of choice. Today's event has drawn attendees from across the mental health community, including the law and policymaking fields, consumer and peer advocacy, county behavioral health systems, law enforcement, students, family members, academics, and more. So thank you so much for making the time to join us. Your participation speaks the importance of the discussion and the topic and the impactful work of the Sachs Institute. At Gould, we aim to be at the forefront of scholarship that benefits people and communities. And there's no doubt that the Sachs Institute is pivotal to our efforts to achieve that goal. For more than a year, the Sachs Institute has been supported by California's Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission to facilitate planning for an innovation project, which will be undertaken by several counties statewide. The focus is on creating trainings, programs, and systems while engaging peers and numerous key stakeholders in a meaningful way as part of an overall effort to implement psychiatric advance directives, or PADs, or mental health advance directives, as a form of supported decision-making. The symposium today epitomizes the life work of Professor Ellen Sachs and the ongoing efforts of USC Gould's Sachs Institute for Mental Health Law, Policy, and Ethics. Since it was established in 2010, the Sachs Institute is consistently engaged in cutting-edge programming, research, and projects in an effort to change the way society views and addresses mental illness. Its primary goal is to promote respect for individuals with serious mental health challenges while advocating for autonomy within societal structures and improvements in our legal system. USC Gould and the Sachs Institute are so grateful for the support of the Mental Health Commission for this important, innovative effort. We also thank our supporters who have ensured the advancement of the visionary work of Ellen Sachs and the Institute over more than the last decade. The Institute would not be able to fulfill its mission without the contributions of many friends and champions. And so in particular, I would like to thank the following individuals and organizations for their generosity: the Doris Bride Trust, the Sidney R. Baird Jr. Foundation, the Anthony and Jean Pritzker Family Foundation, Richard and Christine Getz, and Jacqueline Klein. And now I'm delighted to hand the virtual microphone over to our next speaker, the Executive Director of the California Mental Health Commission, Toby Ewing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. I want to thank USC, the Sachs Institute, and Ellen and her team for putting today's event together. My name is Toby Ewing. I am the Executive Director of the state's Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission. To save that everybody's brain as you think about all those words and all those letters, we just say California's Mental Health Commission. We are an oversight agency of the state of California, and we're pleased to be able to sponsor today's symposium and to join you today. We have many of our staff listening in throughout the day. Our commission, this California Mental Health Commission, is charged with driving transformational change in our state. And we're thrilled to partner with the Sachs Institute on this exciting project that is the focus of today's event. In many ways, Ellen envisioned this day unfolding and the work that we have underway. It was about 2 years ago that she invited me to one of her symposia and arranged for me to meet with Lori Hallmark, one of your speakers, to talk about how we can improve how our mental health system responds to people with mental health needs. I'm very excited about the progress that we've made and very excited to see all of the presentations and the conversations that are happening across the state of California and that will happen today in this event. Before this pandemic, and even more so now, our mental health system has struggled to respond to people with mental health needs. Even when we have been able to respond, we often do not do so in ways that are the most effective, that address broad community goals, or that meet individual needs. We struggle to tailor our response to the needs of individuals in ways that are empowering, that are recovery focused, and that are culturally competent. It can be quite rare, in fact, that we respond in ways that are empowering, that begin with choice, that begin with opportunity and self-determination. And it's unfortunate that we need to have a discussion on something as foundational as choice and on a tool in our health and well-being toolkit as routine as an advance directive. Stigma is part of that challenge. And that too is on our agenda as we think about empowering the people that we care about, the people we serve, the people we love. Today's discussions really are about choice and empowerment, and they're about transforming how we think about mental health and how we respond to needs. Despite the often heroic efforts of mental health leaders, peers, consumers, family members, and thousands of community partners, our mental health system is generally falling short on almost any measure of success: access to care, recovery, jail involvement, suicide. We are not meeting goals. We face a range of challenges, but the good news is that these challenges are not insurmountable. That's important. Despite those challenges, we have incredible resources to address them in this state, and we have hope. California's Mental Health Services Act provides us with hope and opportunity. It provides a policy framework that offers guidance, and it offers tools to fundamentally transform this system. And that really is part of the focus of today's event. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the guidance that California's Mental Health Services Act provides. It sets a high bar for responding to mental health needs. It prioritizes recovery, peer empowerment, and community engagement, three pillars that are foundational for the kind of work that we need to do in California to strengthen our response to mental health needs. It recognizes that to fully transform our system, that system needs to be shaped by, and it needs to respond to the needs of community members. Mental health peers must be at the table, involved in all aspects of the decisions made on mental health services, as well as on policies and practices in this state. Even more importantly, peers must be at the head of the table, particularly with regard to the care that they receive. Remember the importance of choice and empowerment. We might refer to that as peer-driven decision-making. State policy recognizes that our traditional approach to mental health care has been reactive. It has not been peer-driven decision-making. One theme on the agenda today is how we can support peer-driven decision-making. We're very excited to be part of this conversation. The Mental Health Services Act also calls out the need for prevention and early intervention. This point is highly unusual in mental health. If we were in person, I'd ask you to raise your hand and tell me whether or not you have had experiences in the mental health system, or how much of your work and training as a provider, or how much of your preparation to work in this field has been based on a prevention foundation. Typically, that is rare. Some of you may have benefited from those experiences, and the good news is we're quickly moving in this direction. The work of the state Surgeon General around adverse childhood experiences has been very helpful. We've learned a lot about implicit bias in the last few months, unfortunately due to tragedies around this country, but we really need to emphasize a prevention foundation for the work that we do if we're going to be able to respond to the needs that are so clear across our community. The Mental Health Services Act specifically mandates prevention and early intervention, and that mandate is very broad. It addresses housing, employment, family connectedness, educational opportunities and success, avoiding criminal justice involvement, supporting suicide prevention, and supporting overall health and well-being. California's mental health system focuses on the well-being of the people we care about, our consumers, peers, family members, and if we really think through a prevention lens, it is focused on all Californians, because we want to engage early in improving understanding of mental health needs and preventing their escalation as effectively as we can. The nature and the design of public policy around mental health in California has been passed directly by the voters, and it is very unusual. It goes far beyond federal Medicaid policy, what commercial insurance covers, and traditional mental health practices in most countries, even in the United States. But we also have some very powerful tools to support this vision of prevention and empowerment. And one of those tools is what we're talking about today in terms of some of the innovation support. California sets aside between $350 and $400 million each year for prevention and early intervention. That's a sizable investment that is likely unmatched anywhere else in the country. Yet we are still exploring the potential for mental health prevention, and we believe that potential is far more profound than we currently understand. We also have this innovation tool. Prior to the passage of the Mental Health Services Act, it was common to hear from consumers and family members that they faced tremendous difficulties in addressing the gaps in the mental health system. They would try to access services and would get a clear presentation of what was available, and what was available would fall far short of meeting their needs. The common refrain was that the best way to improve care in your community was to move to a community that offered better care. Moving, however, was not an option for many of the most vulnerable people that we serve. In response, California's Mental Health Services Act also mandates innovation. It sets aside more than $100 million every year to think creatively about how we can improve our system. These funds are available to facilitate exploration, analysis, community engagement, to develop ideas on how to fundamentally rethink, reshape, redesign, and improve the systems we have in place and the outcomes that they're achieving. There is some brilliance to this policy. We want today's event to be part of bringing you into this brilliance. This policy challenges a state like California with its diverse individuals and communities, its incredible infrastructure of counties, colleges, universities, outspoken young people, experienced older Californians, the creative talents of our technology and entertainment sectors, and most importantly, empowered peers and family members. It challenges us to imagine something better. And several years ago, we had an idea, a very common sense idea. The state was struggling, and it still is, frankly, with large numbers of people who are sent to jails, who are living on the streets, who were in prison, who are in state hospitals because of unmet mental health needs and criminal justice involvement. Too many people in California are facing criminal justice charges and are deemed incompetent to stand trial for what really are unmet mental health needs. The common sense idea was to look at how our systems work and identify opportunities to better support people with mental health needs before they become involved in the criminal justice system. With $5 million of state funds, the Commission launched an innovation incubator to focus on reducing criminal justice involvement. The project that is the focus of today's symposium is one of several that is designed to bring together community mental health funding with community support and engagement to reduce criminal justice involvement and support recovery, empowerment, choice, self-determination. In partnership with Fresno County, the Commission's Innovation Incubator turned to the idea of deploying psychiatric advance directives with tremendous support from USC and the Sachs Institute. This is a form of supported decision-making. This project is both designed to empower mental health consumers to lead in the design of their care and to shape how the mental health system responds to those needs. Ellen and Christopher from the Sachs Institute were quick to recognize the opportunity with Karen Cejudo, who you'll hear from later today, and they're helping to bring this vision into focus. The concept of psychiatric advance directives is not new, but the potential is, and it's enormous. This project builds upon the values of the Mental Health Services Act: recovery-focused, peer-driven, prevention and early intervention-oriented, innovative, and focused ultimately on systems change. There are many challenges ahead, and California has the talent, the creativity, the partners, the base of incredibly intelligent and driven peers, and a range of supportive allies who collectively can bring this project to success. To date, we have 5 counties that are interested in investing in this work: Fresno, Orange, Shasta, Mariposa, and Monterey. And the people who work in these counties and communities have been incredible at imagining what this project might look like. Collectively, they're proposing to invest slightly over $17 million in local funds to help us explore how psychiatric advance directives can help push our mental health system in the right direction. Today's symposium really is helping to launch this work. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to join you today. I look forward to the presentations throughout the symposium, and we're all very excited to see how this innovative approach to prevention and early intervention, recovery, and support can help transform California's mental health system. We're also super excited that if we can make this work in the set number of counties who are engaging early on, that we can scale this not just statewide, but across the country. The foundation is here, the ideas are here, the energy, the enthusiasm, the partners. Thank you very much for the work that you do every single day. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you again to Ellen, her team, to USC. And I'm really looking forward, on behalf of the commission, myself, and my entire team, to seeing how today's conversations unfold. Before I step away, I have one more chore, which is, it is my pleasure to introduce a short and compelling video by Painted Brain. Thank you.
Choice is important to me because so often people make decisions for me. Choice allows me to choose how I want to be helped, how I want to be served. Choice allows me to be free to make my own decisions. Choice allows me to voice what I want, what I need. Choice allows me to be free.
I am my choices, and choice is who we are. Everyone is a sum total of their choices. Choice makes us. When you deny me my choice, you deny me myself. Choice is important to me because I want to be the author of my own script, and especially when it's something as important as my own health. Too often, people say that those with disabilities should not be allowed to make their own choices.
I think the importance of choice and psychiatric advance directives is something that I think a lot of people overlook because they think, like, of course I have the power to choose. I can choose whatever I want. But sometime when your choices are questioned and someone says, you know what, this person doesn't make as good of choices as me, so this person shouldn't make any choices. This is often what happens to people in the psychiatric setting. Because they can't make some choices, they're deemed to be incapable of making all choices. And that's something that we really don't believe in.
Supported decision making is important to me because it's something that I do every day, all the time. Whether it's going out and asking a friend, hey, how do I change a tire? Going out and asking for advice on what you should do next in applying for a job process. Supported decision making is something that we do all the time without even realizing it. Too often, people with disabilities are told that they don't know or understand enough about themselves to make decisions for themselves. And this is used as an excuse to give them treatments that they don't agree with or to prescribe them medicines that they don't want to take. Supported decision making is something that should be available to everyone regardless of disability because it gives them agency and the ability to feel like they are in control of their decisions and what they decide to do in their lives.
As a Black woman, choice is very important to me, especially with psychiatric advance directives, because too often, particularly in the medical system, myself have been discounted, not believed, and questioned when I had a concern. The ability to make choice is important, particularly in my health, because I want to be able to tell people how I want to be treated. I often hear of particularly women of color saying that they're not believed. So for me, this document, Psychiatric Advance Directives, will give legal force.
So like a lot of people, I didn't know about psychiatric advance directives until very recently, and I'm upset because it's such an amazing kind of document to have for people who are going through a lot of mental stresses and strains in their life. Psychiatric advance directives gives you the ability to choose what kinds of mental treatments you would like to receive before a psychiatric emergency occurs. This gives the ability for people who oftentimes have their choices taken away from them and their right to choose stripped from them, gives them back that ability to choose and gives them more agency to live their own life.
So the role of peers in psychiatric advance directives. So, peers are so valuable to psychiatric advance directives because the power relationship is equal, and there's not one person on top of another. Psychiatric advance directives cannot be put onto peers. They need to be created for peers and by peers. And this process will make the psychiatric advance directive ours, not a treatment facility, not a doctor or anyone else. It really should belong to the peer. It should be from the peer's perspective.
In the Black community, psychiatric advance directives are almost unheard of, particularly amongst myself. I never knew about psychiatric advance directives. So this document will be a force that will allow us to advocate for how we need help and support. Too often, Black individuals are responded to in a way that's not appropriate for what we need. Psychiatric advance directives will allow the Black community to have a voice, to be able to advocate how we want to be treated in health, law enforcement, and housing.
Thank you so much. And we are running a little bit early now. And so we're going to go into our first session. And then after that, we'll have a bit of a break. And the first opening session will be Peer Perspectives, Why Choice is Important in Supports and Services. And the speakers will be Ellen Sachs, a USC law professor and Sachs Institute founder and faculty director. Rachel Chambers, co-founder and COO of Painted Brain, and Tristan Scremen, community liaison with Painted Brain. And now I would like to bring on Ellen. Ellen, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hear me now? I can't hear you though.
Yes.
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, thanks so much everybody for being here. I'm really, just so delighted and so honored to be putting this symposium on and to be speaking with this peer group on why choice is important in supports and services. So first, let me just say that the talks that have gone before, Toby diagnosing the problems and guessing solutions is really terrific. And Rachel and Tristan and everybody talking about their story was really good as well. So choice is important in the most fundamental level for two reasons. People know themselves best and care about themselves most. So lodging choice in them makes sense in terms of serving their well-being. Second, giving people autonomy serves their dignity and liberty interests. One feels valued, honored even, to be given choice, even when people may not think that you're making the best choice. As a personal example, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia some 45 years ago. I suffered with delusions and hallucinations and disorganized speech. I went about 10 years resisting my diagnosis and trying to get off my psychiatric medication. I undertook these efforts with great gusto and failed miserably every time. Though I wish I had gotten smarter sooner, I'm glad that I was allowed to come to the decision to take meds in my own time and in my own way. Choice is important to me. One problem with taking away choice is it's not a sustainable solution unless one exerts force basically forever. If we can recruit patients to want treatment, that will be much more sustainable. Indeed, I have a study in mind about what I'd like to do. So in the medication context, there are three groups. First, those who get on meds and are immediate converts. This helps them when they stay on these. At the other side, people who keep trying to get off or refuse to get on. And then the third group is people in the second group tipping to being in the first group. If we study how and why this happens, we may find ways to help people or get people to tip sooner and more often, which often will be in their best interest. It's of course not always possible to give someone choice. If they lack capacity to choose, we must find some alternative than honoring their choice. For instance, if a person were to say, I would love to get back on this medication, it's helped me a lot, but a voice is telling me that it's going to cause a nuclear explosion, I think we should not honor that choice. At that point, there are two possibilities. Find the person incompetent and appoint a guardian to make his decisions. Or, and this is a relatively new product, which we're discussing today, recruiting him to engage in supported decision-making, SDM. Probably the best way to implement SDM is the use of psychiatric advance directives, or PADs. Most jurisdictions' guardian statutes actually require that guardianship be the least restrictive alternative. We suggest that SDM/PADs are just that, the least restrictive alternative. So instead of appointing a guardian, we ask the person to identify some people in his life who know him and whom he trusts to help him make decisions. Ultimately, it will be the patient's decision, but he will have help if he wants it to make the choice. In one of our projects on SDM, we go to 4 medical centers, USC, UCLA, UCSD, and downstate SUNY New York, to study the use of SDM. We look at whom people pick as their supporters, why, their satisfaction with the decision-making process, and downstream effects on quality of life, like more independent living and working. In another project supported by the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission, big shout out to Toby, we're planning an innovation project with some of our colleagues and speakers here today on the use of SDM and PADs in several California county departments of health. We will be seeing how the county departments are implementing SDM and PADs, and again, on the downstream effects on quality of life. PADs are a product that may be one of the best ways to implement SDM. The prior, advanced decision supports the current decision. In the PAD, the person identifies in advance what they want to happen should they lose capacity to make choice. So they will identify what forms of treatment they prefer, what sort of medication works best for them, whom in their life to contact for help, who their lawyers are, etc. The counties participating in our SDM and PADS projects include large and small communities, as well as urban and rural. So we're going to look at the spectrum. Our hope is that our projects will show that SDM and PADs are feasible and effective. If so, this will change the landscape of choice and restore more people to being architects of their own lives. Okay. Again, as a person who has had choice taken away from her and found this very toxic, I'm hopeful that our work will show SDMs and PADs to be good products. I also want to mention that there's an important, essential role for peers to help their fellow persons with mental health challenges to engage in the SDM and PAD process. For example, they can help the person identify what sorts of issues they can plan for in advance. and how to decide what plans seem feasible and desirable. As a mental health sufferer and a several-time cancer survivor, I can attest that no one understands the experience of these illnesses better than a fellow sufferer. So peer involvement in SDM and PADS is critical. In short, empowered consumers and engaged consumers should lead to the best results in this space of mental health law. Thank you.
And now Rachel. Ellen, can you mute yourself, please?
Thank you. I'm so honored to serve on this panel with such distinguished guests to discuss why choice is important. I had to be honest, when I first heard this question, it immediately brought a range of emotions and questions in my mind, mainly because I'm a Black woman with parents. And immediately, all the historical pain around my culture's choice has come up, as well as my own experiences in my life, including being hospitalized and given the wrong treatment options with severe consequences. And then also losing my only supporter to accidental suicide, the importance of having choice and understanding when choice is very important. In many of these instances, I see choice from a cultural lens. As an African American woman, the concept and employment of choice has been for our people a painful acknowledgement that African Americans in America were brought here without choice, and that in some people's lifetime, African Americans weren't able to make their choices. So for me, when I'm asked about my choice, choice means to be fully human, to have agency over my own choices and over myself. Those things were not afforded to me were not afforded to my ancestors. And from a generational framework, choice is fundamental to my existence as a human, particularly in America. Choice allows voice for agency to employ one's needs and wishes and to fully direct one's path in life. I believe choice is a human right, an inalienable right for individuals to choose their path. Those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This essential equity means that no one is born with the natural right to rule over others without consent, and that governments are obligated to apply that law equally to everyone. The ability to make choices in treatment, particularly for me as a peer, is important. From this PADS project, I learned through my many conversations with communities, particularly communities of colors, both consumers and family, that many people didn't even know that they had a legal choice to guide in their treatment and crisis situation. And with that, I see that as a social justice issue. If people don't have the full information, then how can they make really informed choices to have full agency over their needs? It's our right to know our choices. And I believe this conversation is a rights conversation. We as people with psychiatric disorders most often don't even know our rights. We're not taught about the Olmstead, PADS, ADA, and full compliance or HIPAA. Choice allows us to plan for our future. And when you have buy-in, people are more likely to participate when they know that they have choice. PADS works to engage, to activate, and empower the consumer. So in closing, and as I reflect on myself as a Black woman with lived experience, I've experienced firsthand in crises where my choice was not considered, and it almost even killed me. Crisis planning has been a major milestone in my recovery. And now that I have a PAD, I have a more informed voice to guide my treatment. PADS allows for the consumer to voice and lead in the conversation, thus supporting therapeutic alliance necessary for quality treatment. So this is a call to action to really, for us as peers, to advocate for PADS, to have choice, to bring choice in our treatment. And I'm so thankful to pass this next conversation to my colleague, Tristan, who is a fighter for me and with us in this rights advocacy movement on PADS. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Ellen, and thank you to this whole symposium. You know, I think I want to emphasize a little bit about the role of peers. I know it's been talked about a little bit here, but it's so fundamental that peers be at the center of this choice and PADS development. I'm a person with schizophrenia. I was first hospitalized when I was 20 years old. I've had 4 hospital stays. I haven't had one in a long time. And part of that is because I did a lot of advanced planning. I have had a pad for over a decade. I'm writing a new pad right now to update some things on it. And I think that having this style of one peer helping another is very important. Choice too, choice is so important. And I have been in the situation where, I made not very good choices, and luckily I had a family and a support network that helped me. A lot of people need that help. And this idea of supported decision-making is, I think, the best way to help people who need help making choices, and we don't need to take away all their choices, and we need to just support them and help them make the best choices. That's what happened with me. My family, my sister, my parents, my grandmother, friends and family, they all kind of rallied around me, when I was having very serious psychiatric problems. And that sort of helped me come to terms with choice and how to make better choices. I think, the mental health system often is a kind of a gloom and doom place, and no one even wants to join it. Painted Brain believes in a mental health system that's so interesting and dynamic that anyone would want to join it. And this idea of choice comes back to this. We want to build a system that is dynamic, interesting, fun, creative, so that people do choose to join it, and I think a lot of what Ellen was talking about and Rochelle was talking about too, historically, our choices have been very limited, and we've been sort of relegated into not being able to choose for ourselves, and this has caused a lot of turmoil. And I myself have been forcibly hospitalized and institutionalized, and I've seen a lot of different parts of the system, and I, similar to what Ellen was talking about, I tipped into that category where, now I do want to take my medicine. I do want to have therapy, but it took a lot of work to get there. And that work had to do with my family and my friends beginning to, after my long period of instability, beginning to acknowledge that I do make good choices now. Maybe I made some bad choices in the past, but now I'm making good choices. So give Tristan more ability to make choice, and this tipping, this shift happened in my life, and I think that was because people, listened to me eventually, and those choices began to change, and I started making good choices. And when I was very unstable, I was always able to reach out to my sister, my parents, my grandmother, my friends. I had that support network that I think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that. And if we could build somehow into the system something that would honor people's choices, their decisions, what they want, and also this idea of pre-planning, right? Like a psychiatric advance directive happens before the psychiatric emergency, hopefully. So we have these ideas in place, and I think that kind of system is really good, and disabled people, I identify as a person with a disability, and too often, especially psychiatric disability, sometimes people say, okay, this person just can't make choices. It's a bias. It's some kind of a stigma that's still really strong. I think too many people just really quickly say, okay, all of this person's choices need to be discounted. And I really don't believe that. I think that supported decision-making says, okay, let's find a way to honor as many choices as possible, to find a way to create a system that really has that choice for our peers and for ourselves. And thank you again for letting me be on this panel and for your attention today.
Thank you, Tristan. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Ellen. We are going to go in a short break now, give everyone a little Zoom break. Let's reconvene. We're running slightly early at around 10:55, and we'll have our next presentation about 11 from Jonathan Martinez on supported decision-making. So we'll reconvene soon. where's the timeline? Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to stretch your legs and have a nice break there. We're going to begin just a few minutes earlier than scheduled, but really looking forward to our next two speakers. We'll have a break in between each of them. Our first speaker is Jonathan Martinez. He is going to be speaking about supported decision-making and the value of self-determination. Jonathan is the Senior Director of Law and Policy at the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. So thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I am Jonathan, and I have to tell you how just incredibly honored I am to be speaking at this conference, and especially after the video and panel that you just saw. The reason I'm so excited about that is because everything you need to know, everything you need to know, and everything you are going to learn for the rest of this day, you've already learned. You have already heard the things that I think we can all agree upon. We have all heard the power and the importance of choice, not just for people with psychiatric disabilities, but the power of choice for us all. And that is the thing that I want you to take the most out of today, because that is a value that we can all share. I want you to, when we think about choice, where I want you to start is to think about your own life. I want you to think about the things in your life that are the most important to you, the rights you have that make you the proudest to be a Californian, an American, a citizen, a human being. Think about them. We don't often think about our rights, but think about them now. Think about freedom of speech and elections. Think about freedom of association. Think about the freedoms to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And ask yourself a question. Aren't those the rights that make us who we are? Aren't those the rights that make our country, America, unique in history to guarantee rights to people like that? But what do they all have in common? Choice. Every single right we have has choice in common. Freedom of speech is the right to choose what to say and what not to say. Elections are the right to choose who govern us. Life, liberty, happiness, the right to choose the kind of lives we want to live, with whom we want to live them, where and how we want to live. Choice is what makes our rights useful rather than just hypothetical. Without choice, we don't have rights. And as I said, we all can agree on that. I think that is the bedrock right and the bedrock value that we can take coming into this conference and that we must take coming out of this conference. But my honor, my job, and the people after me is to show you how those values aren't just ideas. They aren't just ideals. What they are ways to ensure that people with disabilities, specifically people with psychiatric disabilities, have the same rights as everyone else. When we read the Americans with Disabilities Act, when it says that people with disabilities have full and equal rights to be full and equal members of society, the things that we're going to talk about today are the way we can make them happen. So if we start with choice, we need to move a little bit farther from choice, because choice, the right to make choices, as I call it, is the one that empowers all our other ones. When we have choice, when we are the ones making choice, the clinicians call that self-determination. Self-determination, fancy word. What it means is making choices. When people are self-determined, they're the ones who are calling the shots. They are the ones who are the causal agents. They do things instead of having things done to them. They make choices instead of having people decide things for them. And here's what we know. Here is what we know from 40 years of science, that people with disabilities, in study after study after study, people with disabilities who have more choice, who make more choices, who are more self-determined, have better lives. We have 4 decades of studies that say for people with disabilities, those who are more self-determined, those who make more choices, are more likely to be independent, healthier, employed, involved in their communities, more likely to be healthier and be able to recognize and avoid abuse and neglect. So in my mind, choice is not just a value. Choice is not just something we hope for. Choice is something we have to make sure happens, especially for people with disabilities. And think about it. If you're at this conference today, If you are a professional or a provider who works for people with disabilities, works with people with disabilities, what is on your screen is exactly what you got into this field to do. If you are a parent of someone with psychiatric disabilities, what is on your screen is what you have hoped for your child his or her entire life. And if you are a peer, what is on your screen is what you have been promised your whole life, a promise that has not been kept. People with psychiatric disabilities have far too often been segregated from society or had their choice taken away. In fact, we have 1,500 years of evidence of that. Going back to ancient Rome, I am a lawyer and a bit of a legal geek. So I can tell you, in ancient Rome, the very first time they wrote the laws down, the very first time they got all the laws together in one place, the laws that we have based our laws on is a book called the Justinian Code. I actually have a copy, and I named one of my sons Justin, which tells you everything you need to know about me. But the Justinian Code, which has all of the laws and all of the rights that gathered together in the ancient Roman nation for the first time, one of them says, if you are feeble-minded, which was their word for people with disabilities, you had to have a curator over you to make decisions for you, to do things in your place. And that began what I call a culture that has gone on for 1,500 years, that assumes, as Tristan Scremen said earlier today, that if you have a limitation in doing something, you can't do anything, and you shouldn't be given the opportunity to do anything. That culture has followed us for 1,500 years. In Great Britain, where we got most of our laws almost word for word initially, they updated the Justinian Code. They divided people with disabilities into idiots and lunatics, their words. And they said you had to have committees over you to make decisions for you instead of you, to exercise your rights for you. And that has followed through to our country. Because as you've heard it, and as you know, if you're involved in this field, it often is our culture, the first thing we do is try to take rights away. Well-meaning, I am not here to say that people mean poorly or that they're trying to hurt people. The vast majority of people who are working with people with disabilities have the best of intentions. But what has happened from our culture is that we have created a system. In California, it's called conservatorship. In most other states, it's called guardianship, where if it worked the way it was supposed to, I'd be a fan of it. But the way conservatorship works in every state, including California, is this. If a judge decides that I am unable to exercise some or all of my rights, what that judge is supposed to do is take away the rights that I truly cannot exercise and give them to someone else, say Ellen. In that case, Ellen becomes my conservator and is empowered and required by California law to work with me to maximize my decision-making and help me become more independent. And again, if it worked that way, I'd be the biggest fan. But what we know from study after study after study is that the vast majority of cases in California and across the country take away all rights. They're called full or plenary conservatorships, where we assume that regardless of a person's ability, regardless of a person's desire, regardless of the support a person may have, that person simply loses all of his or her rights. That type of methodology is used in over 90% of cases, leading scholars and researchers to say that what happens in conservatorships is that a third party, someone like Ellen in my example, has incredible power over the most intimate and personal areas of my life, leading to decisions about where I can go and who I can see, whether I can get married and whether I can get health care. And what we know, again, now from going on 50 years of science, is that as good as self-determination is, and it has been proven to increase quality of life, losing it is as harmful as having it is helpful. We know back from the 70s that when people with disabilities lost self-determination, they would feel helpless, hopeless, self-critical. The rest of the sentence on your screen is they will not, quote, behave because they see no point in behaving. And that's not rocket science, is it? If I tell you time and time again that you cannot do something, that you are not worthy of something, that you do not have the right or opportunity to do something, are you feeling particularly motivated to try? What is that going to make you think about yourself and those around you and the world that you live in? Well, we have studies that show that too, that when people with disabilities, particularly people with psychiatric disabilities, lose their right to make choices, what results is they have lower self-esteem, more passive, they feel inadequate, and they're less able to function. So as I and others have said, when we do something and take away rights for someone's quote own good, we might be actually increasing the harm that led us to act in the first place. And here's where it gets scary, because as I said, I have no objection to conservatorship. I know that there are people who are well-meaning who seek conservatorships. I know that there are people who may need limited conservatorships or temporary conservatorships, or in some cases, full conservatorships. What I concern myself with, what we should all be concerned with, are overbroad and undue conservatorships. People whose rights are taken away, who don't need to lose those rights, or who could exercise their rights with a little bit of support. Here's what I mean. Think about the world we live in today. Think about the technology we have. Think about the supports and services we have. Think about the opportunities we've had. Think about the phone you're holding in your hands that I hope you're not looking at right now instead of listening to me. These phones can connect us, not just orally, but with our supporters. With my phone, I can give someone access to my medical records if I want him or her to come to the doctor with me. I can do a 3-way telemedicine appointment to make sure I've got someone there who can help me understand the doctor and the doctor understand me. I can give someone access to my bank account to make sure I'm not overspending and to budget with me. I can set reminders to make sure that I meet my appointments, that I take the medication that I think I need when I need it. All those things that we can do. And as we sit here today in 2021, there are more ways to make more people more independent than ever before. And yet the number of people in guardianship and conservatorship has tripled in just the last 25 years. We've gone from an estimated 500,000 people to 1.7 million people in conservatorship. And before you say it's because we're getting older as a society, we are. According to a study by the National Council on Disability, the vast majority, the fastest growing people going into conservatorship are 18-year-olds with disabilities. An 18-year-old with a disability is more likely to be in a conservatorship than an 85-year-old. And what we know from statistics is that person is more than likely to lose all of their rights going forward. And the research is scary, because what we know is that people who lose rights they shouldn't lose, people who are in overbroad and undue guardianships and conservatorships, people who lose their rights through other methods, people who lose their freedom, people who lose their opportunities, people who lose their right or chances to make choices, have significant negative impacts on their lives. We have evidence that people who lose their self-determination feel less well, do less things, and in some cases live less long. On the other hand, we have decades of studies that say when people do more things, when they make more choices, when they have more opportunity, they have better lives. They're more independent. They are more parts of their community. They are more likely to be employed. They are more likely to be key and integral parts of their medical care. And they are more likely to be able to adjust to increasing healthcare needs and be a voluntary part of their treatment. So we must find a way forward. Because if we know that self-determination is the key to a better life, and if we know that losing self-determination can hurt, what we need to do is find a way. And I think we can all agree on this, because we can all agree on the power of choice. And we can all agree, I hope, on the importance of self-determination. But there's one more thing we have to agree on, is that people need help. Not just people with disabilities. Everyone needs help. Every single day, everyone needs help. I had to email 3 different people just to find a link to join this webinar. We had to have 3 prep sessions just to make sure we could properly advance our slides on this webinar. Help is part of what we all do. So what I think we need to do moving forward, and what I hope the rest of this day is about, are ways to enhance the self-determination independence of people with disabilities, people with psychiatric disabilities specifically, while at the same time making sure that they have the help and support they need to make their self-determination a reality. Because self-determination isn't just you're on your own. It isn't just please go and do well and be self-determined. No, of course not, because we all have supporters in our lives. And that is why I propose this as a way forward: supported decision-making. Supported decision-making is a growing and recognized methodology backed by research that I'm going to tell you about, that can do the things that if you are a professional, you got into this field to do. If you are a parent, you want for your child. And if you are a peer, you want for yourself, because it can keep you in control of your life to the maximum extent possible. increasing your self-determination, giving you access to those positive life outcomes that we have studied for decades, while at the same time making sure that we all have the help we need. So the definition of supported decision-making is on your screen right now. You can see it. You can screenshot it. If you get a copy of this, please feel free to take it. You'll note my name is on it. I am the co-writer of it. Now that you see it, I do hope you'll ignore it, because this to me is an awful definition. I apologize to Dr. Blank, who you're going to hear later, who is my boss, who is the first author of that paper. But I will tell you, I think this is a horrible definition because of all the words. It seems to me to really be trying to impress. So I'm going to skip this page, and I'm just going to tell you what supported decision-making is. And the way I'm going to do it is to ask you a question. How do you make decisions? What do you do in your life? What do you do when you go to the doctor and the doctor speaks medical jargon at you? You say, like me, I hope, would you please explain that in plain language? What do you do if, like me, you don't know anything about cars and the mechanic quotes you an outrageous price? What do you do if, like me, one of your children is having difficulties in school or in life and you have a family member who is a psychologist or an educational professional? What do you do when you don't know what to do? What you do is you get help, don't you? You call that person you know. You do that research. My sister, the educational professional, when one of my children is having trouble in school, I give her a call. My buddy who knows about cars, when I need something done to my car and don't know if I should pay for it, I call him. And let me tell you, I ask my doctor tons of questions. Then I go and back and I do research. That's what supported decision-making is. Supported decision-making is getting the help you need when you need it in a way you can understand it so that you can do the things you have to do. And if it sounds familiar, it's because we all do it. And in fact, none of us calls it supported decision-making. We just call it life. But I want you to think about all of the cliches that we have in our lives about supported decision-making, because you've used one of these probably in the last week. Don't go off half-cocked. Don't make a snap judgment. Get a second opinion. Make an informed choice. Or my dad's favorite, measure twice, cut once. They all mean the same thing. Get the help you need to make the decisions you have to make. That is what we all do. So supported decision-making is exactly what we are supposed to do. It's exactly what we are complimented for doing in our jobs. If you're a professional listening to this, I imagine at some point you had to conference with a coworker. At some point you asked a supervisor for advice, and the supervisor did what I do, which is to ask you, well, who else have you talked to? Maybe you should do some research. And if you do that, if you're a professional, you probably got a good evaluation, because that's exactly what we're supposed to do. If you are a parent, you have given your child advice time and time again, no doubt, to check up, to review, to get help, to ask for advice, to come to us when you need us. And if you are a peer, you have reached out. I have no doubt that you have reached out to friends, you have reached out to family members. The sad part is if you're a person without disabilities, or as I call it, a temporarily able-bodied person, doing that, reaching out, asking for help, admitting you need help is a virtue. We're complimented for it. We're told we should do that. We're told we should seek help. But for 1,500 years, if you're a person with disabilities, particularly a person with psychiatric disabilities, the second you say, I don't understand, or I need help, or I'm struggling, the culture kicks in. Just like Tristan said, you have a limitation in something, and we're going to assume you can't do anything. So what we need to do is move forward. We need to find a way to ensure, like the Americans with Disabilities Act says, that people with psychiatric disabilities have full and equal rights and full and equal aspects to all parts of life, including decision-making. And the good news is, when it comes to supported decision-making, something else you already know, there's no one way to do it. It's a paradigm, an empowerment. So if you're asking, where's my book? Where's my app? Where's step 1, step 2, and step 3? I have good news. You already know the answer. There isn't one, because you make decisions differently than I do. You need different kinds of help than I do, and you reach out at different times and in different ways than I do. So there are so many ways to empower people to use supported decision-making. There are so many ways to use supported decision-making. Sometimes it's just speaking with someone. I call it a listening ear, a shoulder to lean on, to bounce questions off of, to make sure that I'm doing the right thing and have the right information. Sometimes it's having what I call go-to people. I go to my sister on educational questions. I go to my buddy about car questions. I have someone else I ask about money questions. And we can put that into a support plan. We can put that into an individualized support or waiver plan. We can put that into a power of attorney. And as you're going to hear from Laurie Hallmark coming up next, you can put that into a psychiatric advance directives where we say, when I need help with this, I want to talk to that person. When I am experiencing this, these are the things that should be done. And by doing that, that one simple act of empowering support, we are saying to people that you do have full and equal access. You may want to have a group of people who works with you, sometimes called a micro board or a circle of support, where I speak with you and I ask you for advice, and people in my life give me their input so I can consider it and do what I want to do with my life. All of the things I've just described to you are supported decision-making, because all of them involve me asking you for support, you giving me information in a way I can understand it, so I can do the things I have to do in my life. So we can all leave this conference here today with the values we heard in that video and the comments we heard on that panel as the biggest advocates for supported decision-making. Really, there are only 3 things we need to know about supported decision-making, and these 3 things will carry through the rest of the day and help us incorporate psychiatric advance directives. They will help us create self-determination, and every one is easier than the last. First, we all agree, sitting right here today, that everyone has the right to make choices to the maximum of their ability. And that's easy because that's the Declaration of Independence. We hold those truths to be self-evident, that we are all created equal with rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 2, we all agree that I can ask you, Ellen, I can ask you for help doing something without you saying that must mean you can't do it. And that's easy because we are complimented for reaching out for help every day. We are told we should reach out for help every day. And the third one's the easiest still. We all agree that there are as many ways to give and get help as there are people. First thing you try may not work, but haven't you gone to plan B before? Hell, I go to plan Z sometimes. Something we can try. People work differently. People may not succeed the first time you try something. People may even be resistant the first time you try something, but we can continue to work with them, finding what works for them. Something might work. Nothing might work. If nothing works, there's nothing wrong with conservatorship. But 1,500 years of culture are too much. We must stop assuming that difficulty equals impossibility and work to empower. And while there is no one way to do it, there are lots of resources out there that can help you do it. Just some on the screen right now. The American Civil Liberties Union, I worked with them to create an entire guide on creating supported decision-making agreements. You can find it by Googling ACLU and when do I want support. The supported decision-making brainstorming guide can help you have a guided conversation with someone to find out what areas in their life they want support, how they want to be supported, and when they want that support. Because as you heard from Rachel and Tristan and Ellen, this has to start with the person. We can't be telling the person, this is where you're going to get help. We're going to work with that person to find out where they want help. As Ellen has written, when the person is the leader, when the person is steering the process works better. And finally, one called the Setting the Wheels in Motion guide that I co-wrote with a California advocate, a mom who has 3 children with disabilities. And the first part of that guide is all about her journey in working with her children to help them make decisions. But that second part is the key one. There are worksheets that can help you have those conversations, help you and your loved one, your supporter, your family develop that supported decision-making plan. Find out what's important to and for the person, where that person is and where that person wants to go. And if we do that, we will not only be morally correct, because I don't think there's a person here who can doubt that morally choice is the way we can go. We will be scientifically correct. Research and studies support doing this. We know from research, for example, that people with psychiatric disabilities have better outcomes when they are supported, They are better able to make decisions. In some cases, they have been found able to have capacity to make decisions when they have support, as opposed to when they do not. And again, not rocket science. There are times when each and every one of us isn't able to make decisions, whether because we're having a bad day or whether we don't know something. And if you want a better commercial than supported decision-making, I can't give you one better than this. There is not a person listening to me, unless you have a medical license, who has the capacity to take care of their medical care without support, because you don't have the ability to diagnose yourself or prescribe medication. But what you do is you get the support of a doctor, you get the support of a medical health personnel who you can talk to, you can describe your situation, and who can tell you, this is what I think you have, and this is what I think you can do. That's supported decision-making. And we know that it works, and we know that it works for people with disabilities. A study just completed that I was one of the co-authors of, what we found, we worked with 10 young adults with disabilities and empowered them to use supported decision-making. We empowered them to make agreements and plans however they wanted. And we followed them for a year. We interviewed them, we interviewed family members, we interviewed their supporters. And here's what we found. We found that people who used supported decision-making were more independent, more self-confident. They were better at making decisions, and they made better decisions. And even in the middle of a pandemic, they said they had better quality of life. And again, I say, if you are a professional, that's why you're in this field. If you're a parent, this is what you dream of for your child. And if you are a peer, this is what you've been looking for your whole life, that they've been telling you they're going to give you, and they haven't. This is a chance for self-determination, for peers to say, this is the kind of life I want to live, the way I want to live it. How can you help me? How can we work together to create that life? Because if we do that, amazing things can happen. The people you're seeing now are all people who were in conservatorships. They were all people who had lost their rights. And they are all people who, through supported decision-making, gained their rights back and are now living independently and successfully. This young woman right here, Takora, was living in a car. Takora could not sign a lease for an apartment because she had a conservator, and the conservator was not around. And we had to fight just to get Takora the opportunity to make decisions and have people in her lives. And after a court case, Takora was free. She has a supporter sitting next to her who helps her through her life. And on a very personal note, one more reason I'm so honored to be working with the people in this project is I had the amazing experience of finding out while speaking on a panel only a couple of weeks ago, mid-presentation, that a young woman I represent in California is, to my knowledge, going to be the very first person who will be freed from a conservatorship because she uses supported decision-making. She will receive her rights back, and she will have the support she needs to make that work. And that's why 13 states, just since 2008, just since I represented Jenny Hatch in the first trial to find that people with disabilities have the right to use supported decision-making, have passed laws recognizing supported decision-making, why there are projects like this across the country that are empowering people with disabilities, and why there are incredible professionals like the next person you're going to hear, Laurie Hallmark, who are working each and every day to empower people with psychiatric disabilities to make their own decisions. The last thing I want to say to you is this. We've had 1,500 years of culture telling people with disabilities they can't do things. That the first feeling is to remove rights. We can change that culture one person at a time, one decision at a time. We can empower one person at a time to do one more thing than they did yesterday, to make one more decision than they had ever made before. And by doing that, we change the world because we change that person's life and we change every single person that came after them. The very first supported decision-making case I had took a year. The next one took 1 day in court. Another one was simply an agreement because everyone agreed it was the right thing to do. One person at a time, one decision at a time, we change the world, not just for the people we care about, not for the people we support, not for the people we love, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us. And it is my great honor to do that with you. And it was my great pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was great. Really appreciate you being here. We will take a 5-minute break, about 5-6 minute break, come back with Lori at 11:30. I'd like to remind everyone that we'll be hosting a Q&A session about all of this on May 13th, next Thursday, and we will make sure to get that information out. Have a nice break. We'll see you in a few. Welcome back, everyone. We next will hear from Lori Hallmark. Lori, let me just pull this up real fast, Lori. And she's going to be presenting an overview of psychiatric advance directives, or PADs. Lori Hallmark is a special project director, mental health programs at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. Lori, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chris. Make sure I get my. Okay, if for some reason you cannot see my slide, please let me know. Okay. So at their essence, a psychiatric advance directive is a self-determination based legal rights document, just like any other advance directive, right? So if I have a medical situation, I want to be able to prepare in advance so that I can maximize my ability to maintain my, my choices. It's the same thing with mental health crisis, right? So a psychiatric advance directive is a way to prepare in advance, hopefully prevent the crisis from happening in the first place. But if it does, at the least, prevent escalation and reduce the disruption to my life and the harm that may be caused otherwise. And critically, maximizing my ability to maintain my decision making, right? So it's a way for a person to have a voice when things may be out of control, when they may not otherwise be able to express their wishes clearly. It is the well human being able to make decisions for their unwell self. But I think that it might be helpful to talk about PADs in action. Okay, Frank. So anybody who has not spent their entire life inside of a major city has probably met somebody like Frank. He is a pure outdoors person. Give him a tree to find, go camping, fishing is a really big deal. He likes mudding, all those kinds of things. He reminds me of various people I have known in many places that I've lived, as long as it's not in a major city. He reminds me of one of my cousins. And as I recall, when we were kids, we seemed to manage to seek out a variety of different areas with mud, looking for turtles, which I remember being successful a number of times. But so that's Frank. He would spend all of his time outside if he could, just loves being outdoors. Now, in the course of his outdoor activities, Frank made a very bad decision. And his bad decision was he killed a buck on private property without permission in the state of Texas. This is a very bad decision. Now that buck, the state of Texas valued that buck at $10,000. So his decision to kill the buck on private property without permission in the state of Texas, the charge associated with that is a state jail felony. So we have a problem. And now Frank knows that the police are involved, which creates a whole new situation. So he's having a mental health crisis at this point. He's having responses to the fact that he knows that he has now a situation with law enforcement. And in the ensuing events following the initial event, he managed to collect a variety of other charges. So now we're dealing with a situation where one bad decision has now led into a variety of serious charges. And this is where a psychiatric advance directive could have helped. So there's a section in a psychiatric advance directive where a person can provide individualized information about any kind of engagement with law enforcement and crisis personnel. So it's a way for a person to say, hey, even with all the great crisis intervention training, I can provide you additional complementary, supplementary information so that if I do have to have an engagement with law enforcement, or if I am engaging with some sort of crisis personnel, I know there are certain things that you can do to make things less terrible. There are de-escalation techniques that I can provide to you. Now, Frank didn't have a PAD at the time, and So this did not occur, but think about what is possible if you have the ability to reduce those extra charges, to reduce the potential for danger, as well as to reduce the arrests. Okay, but so that's not what happened. So Frank now has a variety of charges that he's dealing with. So he goes to court. Now, if Frank had been deaf, or if he had been a person who needed assistive technology in order to help him to communicate, we would understand and automatically recognize that that's something that we need to do. It would at least occur to us. With mental illness, it typically doesn't even occur to us. So what ended up happening was Frank was there. He's trying to communicate with his lawyer. He's trying to communicate with the court, and everybody's talking past one another. There's no meeting of the minds when it comes to this is the communication that we're having. And this is where a pad could have had an impact, because inside a psychiatric advance directive, a person is able to say, this is how you can most effectively communicate with me. Here are the accommodations that I need in order for you to be able to speak my language, in order for us to be able to communicate across this divide. But he didn't have a pad, and we didn't have these tools. And so the inevitable occurred, which is that Frank was declared incompetent to stand trial. Okay. So now he is in jail. For anybody to be put in a jail, it's certainly not going to improve anyone's health. It's going to make a well person unwell. This particular jail was better than many that I've seen. But it didn't have the ability for him to go outside. And not only could he not go outside, but he couldn't even see the outside. He didn't have a window. So for a person like Frank, who is an outdoors person and wants to spend as much time as possible outside, being shut away from any kind of access to nature, I mean, not even any air that's not that institutional recirculated air, he immediately started to deteriorate. This is a bad situation all around. And so he's starting to have, issues with the guards and problems within the jail. And so now we have multiple extra things going on here, right? He's deteriorating, and it's possible that he could either get hurt or he could collect additional charges based on what's going on in that jail. And this is where a PAD also would have had the ability to assist him. So there's a section in the PAD that provides information that's useful inside hospitals or inside jails for how to de-escalate a situation that may otherwise lead to an intervention that's an emergency intervention, such as a forced injection, seclusion, or restraint. And these results are bad for everybody concerned. So a PAD, one of the great things about it is it can say, hey, you know what? Before things get to this point where you feel you need to take these steps, here are the things that can help. Here are the ways to de-escalate. That is critical information for hospitals and for jails. Okay, so this is where I enter the picture, meeting Frank. So we had the same goal. Our goal was for Frank to get out of jail. This was the goal. Unfortunately, we weren't really able to communicate with each other initially. I went in there, I met with him, and we were able to meet in a room, a rec room, which was good because it's much better than meeting with glass or some kind of barrier between us. But those rooms, the room is fairly big. It's full of concrete and metal, and everything echoes. So it's very difficult to even try to have a conversation at all because you have these echoes. And he is sitting there. So he's handcuffed, he's shackled. Not only are his hands cuffed, but they're attached to his waist, and he has shackles around his ankles as well. So we are not sitting in an equal kind of situation. So I'm trying to communicate with him. I'm trying to let him understand, look, we are on the same side, but we have to work together in order to get you out of here. And I wasn't able to get through. And so again and again, I met with him, and it got to the point where I could tell he was trying to hold back tears. And then one day what ended up happening is when you go out of those rooms, the inmate has to be let out first. So he was waiting for the guard to come and let him out of the room. And I just said, is there anything that I can bring you. And he had started crying at that point, but his back had been to me. And he turned around and he said, yeah, you can bring me a leaf. And at that point, I realized just how absurd it was, this whole situation where I'm asking him what I can do for him. And he is inside of a jail where he can't even see the sky. He can't even breathe fresh air. And so now I know, okay, well, I have an in. So I thought about it. And what I ended up doing is I took it as an excuse to go to a clubhouse that I had worked at before. And I talked to the members and I let them know about Frank and the fact that he was sitting in this jail and able to access nature and everything that was going on. And so I had a bunch of volunteers who helped me. And what we did was we went out into the garden and we picked leaves and various other items. I think I got some from the store so he would have some herbs that would be really smelly, and put them in wax packets. The captain of the jail allowed me to bring these in. And when I brought them in and I pulled them out and I dumped them over the table, he smiled. And then he cried. But what this enabled, that piece of information that could have been in his pad, if he had had one at that point, I would have known that this is something that can help. And what that did was, as he was sitting there and opening the packets and smelling the leaves and being able to touch and have this tangible connection with the outside, we were able to communicate with each other and get on the same page so that we could work together to our common goal, which was to get him out of that jail. So I do think that there is something fundamental within human beings that we need to have access to nature. And certainly Sammy would agree with me on this. Okay, so let me tell you, I'll tell you a little bit about Sammy. Sammy is one of my favorite people in the whole world. He's one of my favorite people that I've ever met in my entire life. When I met him, he was in his late 60s, and he's in his early 60s now. And since the mid 80s, Sammy has been traveling around. He's walked all over the United States. He's walked down into Latin America. This is how he lives his life. If you offered him an apartment, he would not take it. He does not want to live inside. He is happiest when he's sleeping outside under the stars. Now, he does also consider, he's aware that based on his lifestyle, there are a variety of charges that he is able to pick up for trespassing and other basically the criminalization of homelessness and mental illness. But he considers that he doesn't bear any ill will. He considers spending some time periodically in jail as the price that he pays for his freedom. So yeah. Okay, so how I met Sammy was a JP, a Justice of the Peace from this little town, called me up and said, hey, we've got this man here. He's homeless. We don't want him here. Please come and do something about this, because otherwise we're going to keep arresting him until we can send him away. So that is its own problem that we're not going to delve into right now. So what I did was I went over and I met with Sammy under a tree outside the courthouse. And we talked about this situation of they don't want him here, but he does want to live, out in the world. So what we did was, through our problem solving, we were able to come up with a method for him to exist where he's at least not going to be arrested in this little town, and reduce the chances that he would be arrested. So he has a hub, and when he feels the need to go traveling around, he goes out and spokes from the hub, but only so far, and then he goes back. Now, the ability when you are using supported decision-making in order to do problem solving, to create a pad, one of the really big advantages of that is someone like Sammy doesn't want anything to do with the system typically, right? But now that we're problem solving, we're on the same team and his wishes are being respected. Now he's open to accessing additional services. And that's really critical. And what it has enabled for Sammy, it's only within the past couple of months that this has occurred, but it's something that gives me happiness to know that it has happened. He signed a medical power of attorney. And that was, again, just within the past couple of months. And the way that well, I won't go into all that. What that medical power of attorney means, what the fact that we were able to problem solve and have the trust and demonstrate the respect for his decisions. What that means is that the way that Sammy has chosen to live his life, he has been free and made his own decisions in his life. And the medical power of attorney is going to give him the ability to do the same thing in his death. And so what could be more important than that? going to travel all the way back to Sophia. So Sammy, we met him at the end of, towards the end of his life. I don't think he's going to live too much longer. He looked pretty bad the last time I saw him. Sophia's at the beginning of her life. Okay. So she's about early 20s. She's only, when I met her, she was about 15 credit hours from graduating college, first person in her family to ever go to college. And mania psychosis happened, right? First episode psychosis, she didn't know what was going on. She had a psychotic break all over her university. And this obviously didn't happen in a vacuum. So she gets a little bit more stable. She's out of the episode, she's stabilized. And the first thing that she's thinking now is, I can't do anything. All of the messages she's receiving is your life is over. All those plans and goals that you had before this episode, just forget them. They're done. They're over with. So that was the first thing that we talked about. And I told her about Ellen and gave links. I always do that. So that was the first thing. Now we have a little bit of hope that it is possible. She can still have a life. I mean, she's, early 20s and thinking that she has no choices anymore. She has no life. It's over. So we talked about that first. And then the next thing that occurred is something I think it's easy to forget, which is that she had mania psychosis all over the university, right? This did not happen in a vacuum. And so all of the conduct that she engaged in, now that she's out of mania psychosis, she's aware of what she did. And the shame of what she had done, as well as the horror of having this diagnosis now, this is where we were. But here's what a PAD can do. Not only did the method of our communication enable her to understand that her life is not over, but it allows us to prepare so that that can be implemented, so that the future that she wants can actually happen. How? So we can prepare for practical matters, right? So if I go into a mental health crisis, I know that I need someone to call the school, hopefully before I get to that point, but someone needs to call the school and let them know that I'm not going to be there so I don't flunk out. Someone needs to take care of my plants or my bills or whatever it is. There's a way to prepare in advance. So guess what? Even if you are still going to have a crisis, even if it is still going to happen, you know what? That doesn't mean that your life is over, and it doesn't mean you can't go back to school and do all the things that you wanted to do before. It just means that you need to take some extra precautions, get some extra planning in there. And the other thing that we were able to do is to identify accommodations that she will need in order to be able to go back to school. So hopefully it will be that the psychiatric advance directive and the creation of the psychiatric advance directive and the implementation of it will enable her to access the life that she wanted before, that it doesn't have to be a before and after end, that there is a way for her to access the things that she always wanted to do. And also with advanced planning is Isabella, again at the beginning of her life trajectory. She's very young, also experienced mania psychosis. She's had more than one episode by the time that I met her. She was very close with her mother. They had always had a really good relationship. And actually Isabella was a support for her mother because she was the only person in her family who spoke English. So she was the interpreter for her family. So they had been living, a nice life. And things were starting to break down pretty quickly, because I think, as we know, that those family relationships can become very strained very quickly, and that's what was happening. So they came in, and Isabella wanted her mother in the room. We made very sure that she did want her mother in the room, and so we tried to think about problem solving. What are we going to do? So the first thing that we knew we could do is we could go ahead and put in her PAD. These are the medications that work. These are the medications that don't work. Here is a way to engage with me if you're law enforcement or if you're a crisis personnel. Here are all the things that I know will help. But she also wanted to prepare so that she wouldn't have a crisis in the first place. Isabella is aware enough when she starts to ascend into mania and descend into psychosis that there is a window. She told me it's about a 3-day window where she has the chance to stop it from going all the way to the other end. And that's where she wanted to do some problem solving. We did it with her mom. And so what had been happening is, her mom, when she would, that 3-day window, Isabella identified, okay, if I take my meds, that would be a good idea. But when I'm in this window, I don't want to take my meds. And what her mother was doing was, as soon as she saw things started to go a little awry, she was immediately starting to say, well, hey, have you taken your meds? Will you take your meds? Please take your meds. Or why haven't you taken your meds? She was trying to help. And that was making things worse. So what we did, we came up with a creative solution that she's aware of the delusions that start to happen when she's sinking into psychosis, but not totally underwater inside of it. And so what she did was she wrote letters to herself specifically for those time periods, her well self telling her unwell self the things that she knows her unwell self will hear. Her mother was a little skeptical at first, but she was like, let's try it. So she has the letters and, you know, she can use those. The other thing that Isabella did, and this has only happened once or twice, this is very unusual, and she wanted this to occur. She does not want to go all the way into psychosis. And she identified some objective markers, like I have not eaten in X number of days or however many hours. I have not slept in X number of days. At this point, I direct my mother to take action to have me put into a hospital. It's not subjective, very objective. She wanted it, so that's what we did. And I like to think of her psychiatric advance directive of the way for this family to be able to live the life that they had in the past, to be able to have their loving relationship restored and not deteriorate in the way that so often happens. But they have the plan in place, because sometimes things are going to pop up. It's under the surface, but it's there. But you know what? We can deal with it. Now, Sammy, all the way at the end, right? And I don't know of any family that he has. I am just assuming. I haven't brought it up. I don't think that he has any family support at all. My assumption is that those relationships were ruptured a long time ago. So Frank's father worked his entire life, all of his working years outside as a physical laborer. And no matter what anybody thinks about the oil fields or, the environment when it comes to oil and fracking, that is really hard work. I'm not talking about like someone who's sitting in an office. I mean, the folks who work out there, this is backbreaking work. It destroys their bodies and they don't last long. So Frank's father, Frank Sr., he had spent his life in the oil fields and working construction, and you could tell. He had applied for disability, but he was rejected. He was denied. He needed to do an appeal. But by the time Frank was arrested, their relationship was completely fractured. They were not communicating with each other anymore. So we're kind of in between here, right? We have Isabella and Sophia, who it hasn't quite happened yet. There's the ability to prevent this. Sammy, it's way too late, but here there was still a chance. So while Frank was in jail, his father was only able to go and visit him, I think only once. He lived a couple of hours away. He had a really old truck that barely worked, and he couldn't afford the gas. I mean, if you think about it for a minute and you say, okay, well, how can you not afford, $40, $50 of gas? Well, if I don't have any money, then, $30 might as well be $3,000 or $30,000. I don't have it. So he wasn't able to visit him very often, but they were able to communicate by phone. And during this time period, they repaired their relationship. So that was critical. Okay, so 9 months, I figured out how to communicate with him. And also we have now a reentry peer. So we are using supported decision-making. We're supporting our client. We are communicating with him. We're having success. We're all working together. Everyone's goal is the same. So excellent. And that is how, if we had the effective communication section of the pad from the very beginning, hopefully we would have never ended up in this situation, but we sorted it out through supported decision-making. Nothing else has changed. So now he goes back to court and we're able to communicate. There's not this communication barrier. And that was completely due to supported decision-making. This is information that can go in the pad. These are the accommodations that I need. These are the people who can help to communicate with me, who understand the way that I think. Frank's father did come for the court. date, and we were all hoping that the judge would, declare Frank restored and let him leave. And he wanted to go and live with his father, and his father wanted him to live with him as well. And so Frank Sr. came to the court, and I remember watching him talk to the judge, and he was sitting forward with his elbows on his knees, and his hands were out. And it was as if he was taking every part of who he was and offering it to her, to beg her to allow his son to leave and to leave with him. It was an extraordinary thing to witness. So she did. So he had spent 9 months in jail, and this is a low estimate. So we know that the buck was, state of Texas valued the buck at $10,000. Frank sat in this jail where he didn't have access to the outside or to fresh air or even to see the sky for 9 months at this point when he was released. This is an underestimate. This is all county money, right? So how expensive is it for Frank to sit inside this jail? It was over $10,000 for this. I've estimated it about $40 a day. That's low. However, if you want to look at it, this could have been avoided if we had had that information so that we could communicate with him, but at least we got him out early. So what this meant was we had essentially a savings of the months that he likely would have remained in jail waiting on a bed at the state hospital. So this is county money. Now it's county money to be transferred to the hospital. It's about now with the forensic patients in the state hospital, that's now state money, and it's about $500 to $600 per day. So who knows how much that would have been. Going back to the jail and then time in jail so that the rest of the charges could be dealt with. So this was our savings, even though we could have avoided all of it. At least we had this savings. So this is expensive. To the extent that psychiatric advance directives can prevent the arrest, can prevent people being declared incompetent, it's good for the person. We know that. I mean, just that's obvious, but it's also really good fiscally. I mean, this is expensive. Counties don't have all this money. This is really expensive, and there's a way around that. Okay, so he's released. This work is many, many things. I am privileged to have the colleagues that I have, and I am even more privileged to be able to know the human beings who have allowed me into their life and in this work. But it's also very difficult. And when Frank got out, I was able to at least witness their reunion of Frank and his father, and it was a very good day. So he left and he went with his father, and they went to where his father lives, an RV on some family land, nice RV. And Frank was able to get a job at doing landscaping, which was really great, made me very happy. And he sent me about 2 months after I received a text where Frank is holding a baby deer. And he had apparently in their landscaping, the baby deer had become entangled in some fencing. And so he disentangled the deer, and he sent me a photograph of him holding the baby deer. And I really like that. I think that it's fitting. So at this point, we know what the state of Texas values a buck, or this particular buck, $10,000. So Frank sat in jail, and that was another $10,000. That's $10,000. And how much he would have, the rest of the money that would have been spent if he had remained in jail and had not been declared restored. And we also know the harm that came from Frank sitting in jail without having the ability to access the outdoors. But the other thing that happened is about 3-4 months after he got out of jail, his father died. I didn't realize how bad off he was. I mean, I knew that I could tell that he was really unwell, but I didn't know that that close to death. And so when he died, Frank had a strong reaction, obviously. And this is threatening now his freedom again because he's on probation. And a PAD can enable a cross-system communication that can prevent somebody from being revoked, that can say, you know what, something is going on and let's modify. Let's look at what we're doing here and maybe we don't have to revoke this person. I had a relationship with the probation officer, so did Red, our peer, and he understood, and Frank was not revoked. It's been a couple of years and he's doing really well. And one of the things that was most upsetting to him was that there is a restitution fee associated with this book. And it's a very high fee. It's $10,000 plus. And there's no way that he can ever pay that. So, and one of the things that the effect of that is that you can't get a hunting or fishing license. Now, he wasn't concerned with the hunting license. I think he kind of decided that possibly he doesn't need a hunting license, is not a good idea anymore. But he loves fishing. We had a little talk when he got out of jail about the whole situation of the fishing license and the fishing and everything else. I'm not sure how much he heard, or how much we could actually communicate effectively on that issue. But when I think of Frank, I remember his father, and I'm so grateful that they were able to have at least some time with him out of jail. They were able to have the last few months of his life together. And then the other thing that I think is that I really hope that he is well hidden somewhere on some water in the state of Texas, very hidden, fishing. So it is my privilege and honor to be able to do this work and to be able to serve the people that we are trying to serve. And I really appreciate your time and willingness to listen to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori. That was just great. I'm sure you can hear the virtual applause. We're going to take a short break right now and come back at 12:15 for our afternoon sessions, which will today go from 12:15 to 1:30. And look forward to seeing you in a little bit. Grab a bite if you can. Welcome back, everyone. It's 12:15. We'd like to begin the afternoon sessions. Thank you again for being here. A reminder, on May 13th, next Thursday, we'll be hosting a Q&A session about all things PADS and SDM. Now I'd like to introduce, on the topic of overview of PADS nationally, Marvin Schwartz, Professor and Head, Division of Social and Community Psychiatry at the Duke University School of Medicine. Marvin also runs the National Resource Center on Psychiatric Advanced Directives. Marvin.
Well, thank you very much. Let me get my slides up. Well, thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about psychiatric advanced directives. We've had some terrific discussion so far, and my perspective on this, so what I'll be talking about a little bit is sort of panning out and taking a national view of what's going on with psychiatric advanced directives, and particularly how to make them effective. We've have tremendous enthusiasm at this conference, which is great to see, about how psychiatric advanced directives can empower choice. But the question we've been working on is, so how do you make them take effect in mental health systems? And how do you get them to be an important part of decision-making in the day-to-day lives of people who are affected? So I'm going to talk just briefly about that, and recognize that one piece of the equation is drafting them, getting them prepared, so that the process that goes into creating a psychiatric advanced directive, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then you have the step of putting them in a place that someone will find them. So putting them in a registry or an electronic record, or giving them to your provider. And then the process by which the provider recognizes that they should be activated, that they should be put into use, retrieving them and getting their colleagues to respect them and to use them. And so this whole process, which we call the transmitter-receiver problem, has to be thought about in order to make them effective. And it's great to see the enthusiasm we have today. Let's think about the other steps in this process. Now, one thing to think about is, well, where did PADS come from to start with? And they really came from back in around 1990, when Nancy Krzan, who was medically ill, she had been in a car accident and was in a persistent vegetative state, and her family wanted to remove her from life support, and Mississippi wouldn't authorize it. Because they said, well, how do we have proof, or how do we know that, as the parents said, that Ms. Krzan would not want to be living like this on life support? And when it went to the Supreme Court's decision was, yes, people do have a right to self-determination and to decide what they should do with their bodies, but there needs to be clear and convincing evidence of a person's wish to be withdrawn from life-sustaining medical treatment. And this is where the whole idea of written advance directives came from. And soon thereafter, back in the time when Congress actually enacted legislation, they passed the Patient Self-Determination Act of 1991, which really stimulated the implementation of medical advance directives or living wills, and it created a federal law that hospitals receiving federal funds, one, ask patients if they have advance directives, two, document advance directives and follow them, and have written policies for implementing them. So this was a very significant piece of legislation, because It's the reason why, if any of you have been in a hospital since 1991, why they ask you if you have an advance directive, and usually are pretty vigorous about trying to find that advance directive. So advocates after the mental health advocates after the passage of this law began to think about adapting advance directives for mental health purposes with the hopes of strengthening patient self-determination and reducing the use of involuntary commitment, because so many times when a person can't speak for themselves coherently, the alternative that providers seek out is involuntary commitment. But psychiatric advance directives generally differ from end-of-life advance directives in that most statutes set aside psychiatric advance directive statutes are what's called self-binding. And that is that once the person has been deemed to be incapacitated, and so once the provider, usually a psychiatrist or psychologist in some states, determines that the person is incapable, unable to make and communicate health care decisions, the provider documents in the chart this person's incapacitated, and then the PAD takes effect, and the person cannot change his or her mind about their treatment plan or what they have documented in their PAD until they become capable again. So most of the statutes in the country have this self-binding aspect, although there are a few in which that's not the case. For example, in the state of Washington, the consumer has the option of making their PAD binding or not binding when they complete their PADs. So in the late 90s, states started passing standalone PAD statutes. And in North Carolina, where I'm from, ours is really two pieces of legislation. There's the advance instructions, or what would be equivalent to the living will, and then there's the healthcare power of attorney, by which someone can appoint a trusted person to serve as a proxy or to make decisions for them during the period of time that they've been determined to be incapable. Just a note on the incapacity issue, it's different than being declared incompetent. Incompetency is when a judge hears testimony about a person's ability to make decisions for themselves and appoints a guardian, or in your case, might not be a guardian, but appoints that person to make decisions for them. Incapacity is a bedside determination. It's a clinical determination in which it's written in the medical record that the person's not able currently to make decisions, and that someone else, a proxy, should step in your case, a conservatorship. But the important thing here is think of this healthcare power of attorney as sort of a temporary or emergent form of conservatorship. And the great advantage of it is that it's a two-way street. So many times guardianship or conservatorship is a one-way street. The one's appointed a guardian or conservator, and it usually lasts indefinitely and is hard to reverse. So this is sort of a way to have a temporary conservatorship or guardianship. So where are we with states that have passed these statutes? Just to be clear, you can still write a PAD in any state, even if they don't have a set-aside PAD statute, and then you just would write your PAD within the medical advance directive healthcare power of attorney sections. You don't have to live in a state that has a PAD statute. But let's see where we are. Since the early 90s, when this all started, you see that we now have 27 states that have these standalone PAD statutes. So most recently in Nevada in 2017. But you see, this is the progression of states that, by dint of the advocacy of folks like you, have passed these statutes in these varying states. So we now have 27 states that have these special PAD statutes. But just to be clear, in the remaining states, you can still execute something that looks very much like a PAD. It just is in the format of a medical advance directive, but it can have the same effect. So one of the questions out there, and maybe I don't have to say that at this conference where there's so much enthusiasm, but policymakers do ask, do consumers really want to complete PADs? Do they care about them? Would they want to do them? And so we were involved in a survey with the MacArthur Research Network on Mandated Community Treatment. And we did a survey at these 5 sites: Chicago, Durham, San Francisco, Durham, North Carolina, San Francisco, Tampa, and Worcester, Massachusetts. And we asked 1,011 persons seeking care in these clinics, have you completed a mental health advanced instruction or appointed a healthcare agent for future treatment? And you see that there was a very low rate of completion, really about 4 to 5%. There was one outlier in Tampa, but on average, we'd say about 4 to 5% of people have completed them on their own. So if you looked at that, you'd say, gee, there's really not much interest in psychiatric advance directives. There's low rate of completion. But then we asked, would you want to complete a PAD if someone helped you to do it? So if there was assistance available, would you want to do it? And there we found that about 2/3 to 75% of people said, yes, if someone could help me and help me figure out how to do it and help me complete all the steps, I surely would like to do it. And in fact, in our research studies since then, we consistently have found that when you offer people assistance in completing them, that about 2/3 to 3/4 go ahead when offered assistance to complete them. So that's really good news, but it also indicates there's a big latent demand. There's a big difference between who actually has completed one and the number of people that would like to complete that. And that's important because in order to get attention to psychiatric advance directives so they become part of the practice of providers and health systems, we really need to have more of them out there so that providers learn about them, get to use them, get into the habit of finding them when there's a crisis, and so on and so forth. So we have thought that it's a very important step to develop ways to give assistance to consumers who are interested in completing PADs. So another question is, well, do federal payers and does the federal government support PADs? And in fact, they do. This goes back some years, but during the rulemaking on seclusion and restraint in psychiatric facilities, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services said really very clearly that one of the aspects of the patient's rights in hospital settings is to have psychiatric advance directives, to formulate them and have them respected. And the significance of this is it is a condition of participation for hospitals. And what that means, what that jargon means, is that if you want to bill Medicare or Medicaid and you're a service that does bill them, then you have to respect not only the other rights that people have in institutions, but have the right respect people's psychiatric advance directives and implement them. So the feds went on record with this in 2006 and later reinforced this in making it a quality metric for psychiatric facilities. So the federal government is very strongly saying that they support psychiatric advance directives and that hospitals and other clinics with taking federal assistance who run afoul of this could lose their funding. So we have been interested in what kind of help can we give consumers in completing them, so that when folks draft them, they'll be satisfied with what's in them, and they'll be respected and found when needed. And so we did a series of studies. First, we showed that we can develop a facilitation technique so that people can complete an advance directive with a little bit of help, and that the completed advance directive comports with what they really want. And so we first found that research assistants can do it, but then we also found that clinicians and peer support specialists and volunteers from NAMI could do it as well. So we found that there is a way to do this that's not too difficult. It's just a process, a systematic process of going through the pads, and that it's very successful. And we consistently come up with completion rates of about 2/3 to 3/4 when we ask people if they'd like help with them. One of the lessons we learned along the way is often these are going to be read in very busy crisis facilities. And so while we encourage people to put into them anything they want to as sort of additional information, we do encourage people to keep them simple. So when we were doing our studies, we were trying to find people that had psychiatric advance directives. We found several people who had done them. And this is an example of one that someone has done. And what it illustrates is that there's just too much stuff here. There's also conflicting information if you drill down into it. And most people we showed this to, at least providers, they kind of said, well, I couldn't get through this and really put it into action. There's just too much stuff here. And so when we facilitate them, we try to keep them simple. And we say for each instruction, like in terms of medication, say what other medications you would like and what other medications you wouldn't like, and try to give a rationale, because it helps the provider to know where the consumer is coming from when they complete a pad, and that they have rational reasons for making these choices. We also problem solve and reality test with people so that we try, we don't want people to write advance directives that they're going to be unsatisfied with, or that don't reflect reality. For example, when we have them pick a healthcare power of attorney, we have them pick several people they trust, because we want them to recognize that the person that they would like most to facilitate it, the treatment might not be available that day. So pick alternatives. And similarly, make choices and ask for things that are relatively realistic, because we don't want you to lose faith in the pad, nor be disappointed in them. So that's the facilitation that we've been doing. We also have a project in North Carolina called the Crisis Navigation Project, in which we are training peer support specialists and NAMI volunteers to learn our facilitation project, learn how pads work, and to reach out and provide local clinics across North Carolina so that people can get their pads completed. And we think this is a really important step, that there be networks of you can refer people to when they want a pad. And I think, from the work you're doing in California, it seems like you're well on your way about this, but it's really important to have referral networks, so people who will complete pads, excuse me, and reach out to consumers and say, hey, this is something that might help you. And so this project in North Carolina has been very gratifying, because we have a lot of volunteers who are reaching out to folks who might want them and getting them completed. So I'm just going to wrap up here and just tell you a few of the things that we have found. One, I told you, is that there's a large latent demand, but low completion of psychiatric advance directives in most public clinics. And that to make them effective and to create public awareness, we have to have the same kind of momentum you've seen around medical advance directives. You know, you've seen this thing about the conversation about 5 wishes. We need to have the same momentum in the mental health community as there is in the medical community for end-of-life directives, so that there's a lot out there and there's a public conversation going on about the need for this and how it can assist in substituting for involuntary care and for guardianship. But we also need to recognize that patients or consumers do face significant barriers to PAD completion, that most people need help because the documents themselves are very legalistic, hard to understand. It's not always easy to find witnesses and notaries if you need this, or to figure out how to put them in a place that they'll be stored and retrieved. We found that facilitation or technique that people can use to help consumers really can help complete PADs. And that we found that in that process, the PADs that are created tend to be useful and to conform to what consumers want and are accepted by clinicians. That when they're done carefully and thoughtfully and recognizes sort of the parameters of the mental health system, it helps. For example, if you only put down one hospital you're willing to go to, what if that hospital is free? You're not going to get what you want. So we try to also write the PAD so that they have options for providers to follow to still respect the consumer's choice. So I'm going to stop there. If you want to hear more about PADs or get more information, we direct a national resource center on psychiatric advanced directives at nrcpad.org. And we'd love to hear from you there, see all our information in each state. But if you want to get other information, you can go to NAMI, to this crisis navigation project, to the Bazelon Center on Mental Health Law and Mental Health America. They all support PADs and all have very useful information. So thanks very much for having me. And if you want to contact me, you can contact me at marvin.swartz@duke.edu or contact me through the National Resource Center. And again, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Marvin. We really appreciate you being here as part of our presenters and speakers today. Next up, we are going to go right into talking about California and the California PAD Innovation Project. Our speaker will be Kiran Sahota, President of Concepts Forward Consulting and the Program Manager for California's Multi-County PAD Innovation Project. Kiran.
And there we go. Whoops, nope. When I do that, it takes over my entire computer. So I'm going to have to change my mode here. Sorry about that. I had this all figured out too. I was all ready to go. I'm gonna try that again. Okay, there we go. Technology at its best, especially in the afternoon. Good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for spending their day with us. And I especially want to thank the Sachs Institute, the MHS OAC, you heard from Toby this morning, our panelists, and most importantly for me, it's the 5 counties, Fresno, Mariposa, Monterey, Orange, and Shasta, that through their innovation funding are taking the first steps forward to move PADs to the forefront of mental health transformation in California. My name is Kiran Sahota, and as Chris just said, I am the president of Concepts Forward Consulting, and I am the project manager for the Multi-County PADS Innovation Project. And with that, I'm going to walk you through our slides. Now, some of this information you heard this morning, Toby talked about the innovation background, but I just wanted to reiterate how important it is our Mental Health Services Act funding in California We are a unique state where we do have 1% of our millionaires tax that does go towards mental health programming in California. And the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission, or what we call the MHSOAC, they have a portfolio or a collection of projects and grant programs. The key element of their strategic plan is to transform the mental health care system in California. And these projects specifically advance the priorities of the Mental Health Services Act, including the reduction of the recidivism of hospitalization, incarceration, and homelessness. And as you've heard today as well, PADS really impact all three aspects of those the recidivism in those areas. Traditional efforts of isolated innovation projects have been unable to move the needle on statewide transformative change. Yet the multi-county effort allows for collaboration, capacity building, and partnerships to meet the needs of a statewide systems change. And so, as you know, this PADS project, we truly are looking at a statewide systems change. You just heard quite a bit about the history of PADS. I had the Self-Determination Act as 90. However, I think I stand corrected at 91. But it did establish the patient's ability to develop advanced directives for their treatment at the end of life. And it also applied more broadly to the psychiatric types of treatment. However, since the 90s, 27 states, as you just heard, have enacted instructional PAD statutes. However, the expected widespread use of PADS just haven't come to fruition. And as you can see, many states are attempting to create PADS, and the movement forward and being able to give choice and voice to our mental health in the event of a crisis the momentum is there, but oftentimes the pieces all put together just aren't there. SAMHSA states some of the barriers, such as functional impairment of the individual, social isolation, and difficulty engaging persons with mental illness while in a crisis. Other barriers may be the lack of awareness or understanding of the PADS instrument or tool, and focus on physical health versus the whole person health. Big change that we're looking at in California is really merging both together. Skepticism that PADS will not be honored in a time of crisis, as we know that's happened, and perception that PADS are cumbersome and time-consuming, and that there may be legal constraints that just may not be realistic. So these are items that we want to address. So when we look at what our Mental Health Services Act Innovation Project objectives are, the counties have gotten together to look at what exactly we want to do in the state of California with this project. And really we look at wanting to standardize a PADS training. I looked at some of the questions in the chat, and I hope to answer two of these questions. What is stopping PADS from being supported in California? And then also, how are we going to really bring awareness to those that lack mental health awareness? And that's really what we look at the training and understanding to communities and stakeholders. We are not looking at this project as a one and done, where you bring out another PAD template and train people how to fill it out. That is not, it just hasn't worked. In all these years, it simply hasn't worked. We're really looking at training our communities and involving our peers, our NAMI, our stakeholders, our law enforcement, to say, what is it that you don't understand? What is it that you need to understand? And to have a standardized training that we can replicate in all our counties. We want to utilize peer voice when we look at a standardized PADS template. In the entire nation and multiple countries, you can see 25 to 30 different PADS templates. But do they really ever look at what the peers have wanted law enforcement to know, family members to know, hospitals to know? Do we need it to be 25 pages long? Maybe we need it to be 3 pages long with the option to have 25 pages of your information uploaded into a document. So really utilizing peer voice to standardize a statewide PAD template. And so with that, we want to create a standardized toolkit. And a lot of folks don't like the name standardized, but what we want is fidelity. We want to be able to train. We want to be able to have a PAD template and training that can be replicated. So no matter where you live, if you live in San Diego County and you've moved up to Fresno County or on to San Francisco County, that training and that PAD is going to be consistent no matter where you are in the state of California. We want to utilize PADS We want to utilize peers to help create, to sit with that individual, to create their pad. So knowing that lived experience and understanding can lead to open dialogue and trust. Hey, I was hospitalized, and have you thought about these different aspects if you were to be hospitalized? Do you want them to know your medications? Do you want them to know your allergies? Do you want them to know how it makes you feel? So really having someone with lived experience to sit with someone and creating a pad. And we want to align pads with the medical advance directive. Again, doctors have no problem seeking information on a medical advance directive, but being able to tie physical and mental health, which equals whole person health. And in California, that's what we want to look at, is really the whole person, not just the medical side of the house, but the mental health and medical. We want to create a fully functioning cloud-based platform. And what I mean by that is literally a place where we can hold, house pads, training material, the template, anything that you would need with a pad that literally would be utilized in the entire United States at some point. To be able to have that aspect of this project is pivotal, because when you look at the research, the one hangup through multiple states and countries is the lack of a place to put a pad. And to have it in a standardized place where peers determine, hey, I want law enforcement to know this information. I want hospitals to know this information. I want my support person to have access to it, to be able to log on to a web-based app or a web-based platform, as we say, and to be able to pull the pertinent information that is directed by the voice and choice of our peer and the person filling out the pad is pivotal, again, to this project, and being able to truly move pads forward. That, again, no matter where you live in the state of California, you can have that pad in every aspect of that state and throughout your life. If you wanted to change it as you change medications, if you wanted to change it as perhaps your support person has passed on or is no longer in the area that's going to be able to quickly assist with addressing your crisis. And also the ability to move something like this to multiple states and to eventually be nationwide. So I live in California, but I'm going to move to Nevada, and to be able to have that pad be able to transfer with you very seamlessly, to be able to have law enforcement connect their systems so that dispatchers might be able to immediately say, hey, you're going out on this call, that individual has a pad. And so before law enforcement ever was to be able to reach that call, they know that person has a pad, and they'd be able to help address some of those de-escalation techniques that might be in that pad. And ideally to help prevent the recidivism in inappropriate hospitalization and inappropriate incarceration. We do want to look at the legal aspect of it, and we want to look at creating a legal structure and not just using legislation to create a forced environment. Oftentimes, this is what we find happens with legislation. Legislation drives a project, which then falls flat. We would like the peers and our peer advocate groups, our family advocate groups, our law enforcement advocate groups to be able to say, this is why it's important, and this is why we need access to it. We need to be able to input it the way we would like it to be read. We would like it to be accessed the way we need it, but to be able to have the project lead legislation and to be able to make those changes, because when you have that acceptance at those county levels and within the state, it's going to be so much easier to be able to enforce it as we go forward, but really looking at how to enforce the use of pads. And a lot of that will be through the education. And then ultimately the outcomes is you can't improve a project without having outcomes. And so being able to look at what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to tweak, what is so fantastic, we can't wait to share it with the world. And so really looking at the ease of access. I mean, this is part of the fundamental flaw of pads currently, is the ease of use and the ease of access. And so really being able to create all those steps along the way to engage our communities, to understand pads and the importance, as you've heard all day, the importance of choice and voice, and to be able to use our peers and our stakeholders and our family members to help guide and lead this project. So that is the gist. I do have to say, this is an innovation project. And so when we're innovative, we may fail along the way at a few steps, but what we would like to see at the end is the success. And our ultimate goal of a statewide standardized pad template, toolkit, and a technology platform in order to move pads forward in California and hopefully nationwide. And with that, I thank you. And I will pass over back to Chris. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your important work, Karen. We're so glad to have you here. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back with our final session of the day, which will be peer reflection on the day's proceedings. So stick around. We'll see you in 10 minutes at 1 o'clock.
Sir? Any final comments before I go?
Yeah. Wait, you're not on mute. You're not on mute.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. It's very important to share our work and share ideas. Looking forward to this last panel, very important peer reflections on the day's proceedings. We have Claudia Vargas, mental health peer specialist with the TRLA, which is Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid PAD project. Paul Eisenhower, peer specialist, advocate, voice hearer with the TRLA PAD project. Rachel Chambers and Tristan Scremin from Painted Brain. And our moderator is Peter Blank, university professor and chairman of the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. With that, I'll turn it over to Peter to help guide this important discussion.
Thank you, Chris. I hope you all can hear me. And what a great and interesting day. Talk about all the different pieces of the elephant that were touched. Really incredible remarks. I mean, I heard people, peers, choice, community, technology, making sure this works. It's an ongoing living project that will be looked at carefully and evaluated both from a social, of course, an individual point of view, as well as from an economic point of view. And without further ado, because I'm excited to hear what these folks have to say, I have the easy job today with our panelists. I really just want to go around with the first question, maybe start with Rochelle. What did you think of what you heard today? What was exciting to you, and what do you want to hear more of?
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to tell you what I heard. So what I really did hear today is a lot more work needs to be done around this initiative. I hear that there's more education that's needed among peers, family members, doctors, lawyers, and law enforcement. I hear that more advocacy needs to be done among peer supporters throughout our great state. I hear that we need stakeholder feedback, which is necessary to the success of this innovation project or any innovation project. There's definitely going to be feedback needed, particularly because I see this as a social justice movement. At Painted Brain, we are dedicated to ensuring inclusivity in all projects at the beginning of these. So what I'm hearing is that we're a need for a call to action for folks to get involved. I'm hearing that peers need to organize, get feedback back to our stakeholders and to our counties so that we can organize and get this done. So I'm hearing a lot of work is needed to be done, but we have all the right people to get it going. Thank you.
Well, Rachel, as always, you get right to the point. And I must say, I liked your comment about this being a social civil rights issue, particularly as we emerge, hopefully soon, from the pandemic, and we have a whole new wave of activism and citizen involvement and accountability in the country. PADS and its broader framework, SDM, is really a part of that greater movement towards equality. So very well said. Tristan, I put the same question to you today, just now. What did you hear today?
Yeah, I heard a lot of things too. I was very happy to be on this call. Very honored by the people on this team. I agree, peers need to be central in this. I heard that again and again. The importance of choice. You know, I'm from Latin America. I'm an immigrant to this country. I came here as a little kid. And, you know, our family didn't understand the system when they got here. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of immigrant families, you know, if they have a loved one who has some psychiatric disability, I think PADS can be this great way to let their choices be known and heard. And I heard a lot about that. I heard that there's a lot of different populations. I heard that there's no cookie cutter answer, right? This is not a cookie cutter thing. We need to develop maybe a system, a protocol, a way to train people. I'm very inspired by some of the work that Lori and her team are doing in Texas. Also, you know, really the architect of a lot of this is Ellen Sachs. I mean, who has been out here for decades talking about this and the importance, the need. And I heard Ellen highlight some very important points about the importance of choice, the need, and why choice is important. Jonathan Martinez, I heard him talking about how STM is really for everyone, not just for disabled people. People do it all the time. All kinds of people, get help in decisions, not just people with disabilities. So we need to remember all of these things and keep them fresh in our mind, that these are not static issues. They're dynamic. We need to be constantly thinking about new populations to outreach to. California is very diverse, so the whole United States is really in a lot of ways, and we cannot forget about all our differences and all the things that bring us together. And each group may have its own niche, and that's okay. And we need to be agile enough to respond to that. I also heard about ways that people could get these pads. How can we get them to them? And again, I think choice, and each individual should decide how their pad is to be used. I don't think pads should be used against someone's will, and if we create a list of pads, I think there should be a way to get off that list if we don't want to be on that list, or if we change our pad. Or I think that I heard a lot about that too, the dynamic nature of pads. They're not static things. So those are some of the things I've heard, but I could go on and on. It was so cool to be part of this discussion. With that, I'll hand it back.
Well said, Tristan. Also, I resonate with so many of the things you say also, not as a downer, but we all come to this agenda from different perspectives. I sadly lost a close family member with a psychiatric disability this year to a violent death, and she did not have a pad, and we tried to work on that, but there are real life and death consequences here that we are talking about today that are so inspiring and so important. Claudia, I haven't met you before, but you come very highly recommended from one of the people whose opinion I take very, very carefully, and that's Lori Hallmark. Tell us a little bit about what you heard today. We're going to go around a couple of times, so don't feel like you have to say everything the first time.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here and work with Lori and Paul, and just like everybody that is pushing forward pads and empowering people through choice. I think like at the end of this symposium, if choice is not a word that you heard, you weren't quite listening. And there really is power through choice. You can't make an informed decision if you don't have the information, if you don't know what your choices are, right? And pads and working with peers is one of the ways to know what your options may be, or at least open up your brain from the usual thing that you get. You usually hear about the limitations that you may have when you get a diagnosis, but you don't usually hear about the options that you have to lead a life that is genuine and true to you. And at the same time, I think something that we have to remember, and that I heard throughout everyone's presentation, is that recovery isn't just, or like diagnosis is not just about like working on like, hey, like getting to my doctor and taking the right medication and what have you. You're a person that has goals. You're a person that wants to sculpt a life that feels very genuine to yourself. And just because you get a diagnosis doesn't mean that you have to give up wanting to go back to school, open up your coffee shop, I don't know, work part-time at a nursery, whatever it is. I think it's very important to know that not only are you working on your recovery and doing all the treatment, but you're also working on your life, because that's important as well.
Well said, Claudia. And I think choice is the operative word, which of course is a vehicle to human flourishing, as you say, which is what we all want at our institute, the Burton Blatt Institute. Without being overly scientific, we have received a large grant from the federal government, Health and Human Services, to conduct the first randomized controlled trials ever looking at the importance of self-determination. And we're very excited about that, but we will never lose focus on the individual, as you all say, and on what it means to flourish from an individualized point of view. Paul, you're up next. It's nice to meet you as well. I'm saving Ellen Sachs for last. Paul, you also come very highly recommended from a good source that has whispered in my ear, Miss Hallmark, and welcome. What did you hear today?
Well, thank you. I'm very fortunate to be working with Lori. I, like many people, until I met Lori, did not know about PADS. I can tell you that awareness is important, and availability and access is important, because as a person who is a person with a lived experience with the mental health system, you know, I am not able to go out and get a lawyer to make a psychiatric advance directive and look for me. So that they're in legal aid is great, you know. Awareness, and I tell you, when I was in the hospital, when I got out of the hospital and got control of my life again, the first thing I thought was, how do I keep that from happening again? What do I have to do not to go through this situation again? How do I change this bad situation? So, and you know that it's, you have that intuition, this could come again. What happens? What do I do for next time? How do I change it? And a pad is how you do that. Your pad is your voice. It's your way of saying, hey, you know what? This don't work. Try this. I worked at a state psychiatric hospital, and the people there, they came up to me and they wanted insight. It's like, they don't want to restrain people. They don't want to do this stuff to them. I mean, nobody wants to go to job and do that kind of stuff, but it's like, I told them, you need to give them options. Give the patient options so you don't have to go through the situation. And when you make your pad, you create options for the nurse and the psychiatric staff. It's like, hey, instead of doing that, why don't you offer me to go outside and drink a cup of coffee or listen to my headphones or something, and change that environment. And that's how we create power in our lives, by voicing what works for us and what doesn't.
Really well said, Paul. And I hear your themes as well. You're adding another dimension. Of course, you mentioned access, and Kieran, in her great remarks, talked about technology. We now live in a world where we're doing this via Zoom, and who knows who's going to hear this, you know, and what we're saying. But there is an element many of us are working on now, and that is the aspect of technology. How do we do it safely, securely, in a usable fashion, and most importantly, so the individual retains control and choice of how that pad is used? And I think your remarks in that regard, Paul, are very illuminating. Now I turn to not illuminating, but luminary, Ellen Sachs, who has really been a role model for me. Ellen, thank you for organizing this symposium. And gosh, I'd like to hear from the MacArthur genius, some genius remarks about what you heard today. The MacArthur genius has got to unmute herself. Can't hear you. Can others hear her?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, and we just reinstated your prize.
Thank you. So my understanding was that I was not going to be reviewing the day's events, but giving some concluding remarks. But I will, if I master review the events. I think they were really, really terrific conversations. We heard about SDM and the value of self-determination. Got an overview of PADS, an overview of PADS nationally. We've heard about the California PAD Innovation Project program. So I thought that the day's events went really well. So we've listened in particular to peer reflections on the day's proceedings. And I think those thoughts were really, really important and really impactful. Should I just go on with what I was going to say about my conclusion?
Well, that's excellent, Ellen. I'll come back to you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but we will want to hear your closing remarks, certainly, and we're all excited to hear that. I'm coming full circle back to Rochelle. I always have a smile, Rochelle, when we're talking, because you're always lighting up things that I'm thinking about. Well, we've already talked a lot about this today. I know we've had many issues raised. What's the positive impact that we're really talking about here that PADS is going to have on the daily lives of people, not just with psychiatric disabilities or impairments, but everybody?
Yeah, I think from what I've been hearing, Painted Brain, as we noted, has already been doing some initial listening session and talking to peer organizations and leaders and family members and consumers. And quite frankly, most, if not all, individuals that I've talked to believe that PADS will be transformative in the lives of individuals with mental health challenges, particularly for communities of color. Many noting like they just didn't have a clue what a PAD could do or how it could be enforced. So I'm standing right now and letting you know that with that we have and this education that we can do and provide for peers and individuals with lived experience, I believe that it can be transformative in the life. And we see it as demonstrated by Lori, the practicality, the mechanics. So we're not just getting on here and saying that it's going to be positive. We actually, people can actually see that this can be implemented. We have Claudia and Paul on here that actually are implementing these PADs. So we already see that it's positive and it has positive impacts on the lives of others in other states. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what we can do in our great state and with the leadership of our peers that have already been doing it in the momentum. So it's already a lot. There's a lot of hope already around. So we're seeing it and we're ready and we're activated. And I appreciate the space to be able to articulate that and to bring peers together to talk about how we can implement this so that we can see that change.
May I ask you a question, a follow-up? Rachel, not to put you on the spot, you mentioned this earlier, as a woman of color and in a state like California that is terrifically diverse. Fresno County is very diverse, Latinx, Hispanic communities, and other communities versus Los Angeles. Can you frame this discussion in this larger reckoning we're having now in the context of race and ethnicity and equity?
Yeah, I think that to frame it, I think that it allows for, PADS allows for a space to talk about how we interact with police and how we deal with law enforcement. Those conversations in housing are already coming up, and people of color been shouting out and talking about the disparities that are happening in the injustices. In LA, we have some of the worst homelessness issues, particularly people of color. These conversations are happening, and PADS and the expansion of PADS and the implementation in our state allows us to bring these conversations to the forefront and to put some meat behind it, some force behind it. So framing this in the context of race, equity, I believe that it's in alignment with what people are asking for: more access, education, understanding of their rights, be heard, so hopefully I answered that. And that's just how I see it framed in the context of what's going on right now and how we can make some change.
You more than answered it. We really are talking about a new type of conversation between individual and community, between individual and choice, how to live in society. And Tristan, you also come, I believe, from South America, an immigrant background you mentioned. Bring that perspective in as well, if you would.
Yeah, California and the US in general has a large population that speaks Spanish. I came here not knowing English. I was a little kid. I think some of our folks who are monolingual have extra difficulty communicating what their wishes are going to be. Also, this document, this advance directive, is in advance usually of a crisis. So it helps people plan. It helps people understand, similar to what Rochelle was saying about their rights, about a lot of communities just don't know what is a PAD. I mean, so many people don't know what it is. And it was interesting to hear that when people do know that they can get help filling out PADs, many people want to make a PAD. Left to their own devices, if they're just given a stack of paper and said, fill this out, it seems too daunting, too difficult. But with some help, it is possible. And the things that were outlined in this talk about supported decision-making and how people can support each other to make these documents, the importance of peers and people who have been through this system to help. And of course, Claudia and Paul, their work is basically that, they're actually doing this exact work and helping those communities. It's something that is very unique. And I don't think there's that many people doing this work right now. There should be many, many more people, because the need is very high, especially in communities, color, immigrant communities, monolingual communities. It's really important.
Well said, Tristan. And of course, issues of poverty and equality, as you've talked about. Claudia, I would put the same question to you about the positive impact on people's lives, but you hail from Texas, which has a whole different sort of demographic issue in some ways than California does, similar in many ways. Perhaps you can reflect on what you've heard so far about the impact of PADS and what you've seen on people's lives, but also approaching it from this multicultural equality approach.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think one of the great things about a PAD is that at the end of the day, it's your voice. You can put in it things that matter to you, whether it's like your religion or like things that are very important to you, right? At the same time, Tristan mentioned something that is very important across the board, whether it's in Texas or somewhere else. It's that communication aspect, as well as planning in advance. If you plan in advance, you kind of have like a safety network where you are able to know that if there are certain warning signs that are coming up, these are the people that you can go to. But then you can also know how to communicate. Like if, say, sometimes family members or specific people in our lives can really like push our buttons, right? And just being able to know how to communicate with them, how to communicate with our doctors, how to advocate for ourselves, not just outside of the pad, but while making the pad. Because when you're making the pad, like if you're working with Paul and I, we're not telling you what to put in your pad. We're just sort of kind of brainstorming with you in a non-judgmental way and allowing you to do that self-advocacy, just really practice what self-advocacy looks like at a small level of just like putting it in your pad, and then you can go ahead and implement it. When you're working with your doctors, you can self-advocate, like, hey, so this medication isn't working for me, or maybe working with, I need to change my doctor because we've been working for a while and it's just not going anywhere. That self-advocacy part is so critical, and it starts at the pad.
Claudia, I mean, each one of your comments is so right on. If I may follow up with you, Claudia, I made a couple of notes with regard to the planning issue, but of course, also this is a cross-generational issue. I think to myself, all the kids who have IEPs, individualized education programs, from special education, all the individuals who are in reentry from prison and jails or juvenile justice facilities, or older adults who are leaving nursing homes. Do you see this as a cross-life issue? Because our work shows, and I'm sure it's your reaction as well, choice begets choice. When we make decisions, we make decisions. So why not start this at the youngest ages or at those crucial points where people really need that individualized approach? What do you think of that?
I definitely agree. So like I actually do have a background in teaching little kids, and it just goes back to that having the choices and know what your options are, right? Like I work with a lot of kids that also have like 504 plans, and then just you being able to like work with them and not judge them and say like, hey, these are your options. Like maybe you're really struggling with reading, but maybe we can do this. And they'll start holding you accountable, especially the little kids. And with Paul and Lori and our team, we definitely work with individuals that are about to turn 18. And, a lot of the times what happens is that parents really get told that the only option, or at least like in parts of Texas, you get told that, like your child's about to turn 18, maybe guardianship's the way to go. And if you're the parent, I can understand like that's the only option that you're hearing and you want to make sure your child succeeds, but you're not aware of your options too as a parent, that there are other ways that your child can lead a life. And PADS are definitely not a reactionary document. This is for planning ahead. So the earlier that you do it, or whenever you want to do it, so that you can start your life, to start to live a life genuine to you and recovery that looks and feels like yourself, the earlier the better.
So this is a cross-life experience. So Paul, now we're continuing to peel away this onion, which is a really fantastic conversation. If I may ask you a question, families, particularly parents and families. I know in my own situation, I'm not getting too personal, it was very difficult for us as family members to work with our loved one, work is the wrong word, to come to some sort of understanding before it was too late. This is not parents versus children. It's not families versus individuals. How do we balance, Paul, in your experience, individual rights, families who obviously care about their loved ones? How do you make that work in your experience?
I believe that it's about acceptance and about respect. And this person, maybe your son or your daughter, and they're a little different than you expected, but they're still your son and daughter. And it's all about this respect and acceptance of them. Things may have changed. You know, if this was a car accident and you were disabled from a car accident, you would go, well, you know, he got injured in his car, he's got a broken leg and he's got a limp, and you'd accept it. But people don't accept that with mental illness. They think, oh, well, we got to give you a pill and you'll fix it and you'll be back the way it was. Many times you can't come back to where it was. Something happened and something changed, and the person is dealing with it in one way or another. And the best thing is to be supportive and understanding, but I would say to support them and respect them. I've seen so many people incarcerated simply because, you know, they have this diagnosis and we want them to get help. We want you to get help, so we're going to call the police, which is probably, they're not the warm and fuzzy ones to be calling if you're having a mental health crisis. And many of them have not done anything. They're just not done anything. So they get charges like trespassing and if they back off, they're evading, or if they touch the officer, they're assaulting. And these are serious charges, and they end up in a system, and it's a mess. And if you had more acceptance for your child who is going through this, and try to learn more about what they are going through. Try to focus on what it is, the experience, and not just the diagnosis. Many times the diagnosis is this label, and people go, well, I need my bipolar medicine. Well, actually, what is it you're trying to deal with that medication, and then deal with that actual thing instead of throwing a whole genre of drugs at you. And so,
well, let me stop you there, Paul. I don't mean to interrupt you because I want to make it through the lightning round, one round with everybody, but I build on what everybody says. And Paul, you said acceptance and respect, which of course are crucial foundational pieces of what we're talking about. Rochelle, acceptance, respect. Do you see a day when we can get to that point in California and elsewhere, with California leading the way?
Oh yeah, this is our great state. We have some of the best minds and we're innovators in our state. We're diverse. We're willing to work across the aisle, work with law enforcement, work with peers, work with families, bring diverse communities to the table. So if anywhere, this is going to happen here, and it's going to be enforceable and collaborative amongst partners. So I see hope. I see acceptance. Because we're in a movement. This is the new normal. Advocacy, standing up for your rights is on the forefront. So yes, there's a lot of hope and acceptance in our future, in our great state.
Thank you, Rochelle. Well said. Tristan, acceptance and respect. You see a day when we will move significantly in that direction, or maybe we have?
I do. I think that day is approaching, and I think it's good. Acceptance and respect are fundamental. I think, you know, Paul has a lot of insight when he brings those up, and I agree with the comments so far.
Claudia, we're back to you, but in particular, Claudia and Paul, because you guys, as Tristan and Rachel do, but you all particularly have devoted your time to really directly work with people to create pads. And what is it that you have? What do you think that they've really learned from this? I guess, Paul, you You gave it away already: acceptance, respect, control, choice. Claudia, do you want to articulate that for us? These will be the last 2 points. Claudia and Paul, I'll give you the final points of the day, and then we'll go to Ellen, I believe, for some closing remarks and perhaps a video I think I'm supposed to introduce as well. Claudia?
Yes, so I think, and I'm sure Paul will definitely talk more about this, but I think the respect and the integrity of a pad rather comes from like really connecting with the individual that you're working on a pad with, right? And respecting what they want to put comes down to like what language they want to put on their pad. And just, you know, when I have worked on pads, we don't just work on the pad, and the work really doesn't just end at the pad. We work with this person sometimes long-term, and there are resources that come up. And so sometimes we just bring up like, hey, you know, like you may be aware of this or not, but there's like this peer group or there's this in your area that sounds kind of like you might be interested in it. And you have to respect the choice that people have. If they say like, hey, I'm not interested in that right now, or like, I would not like to go for that at the moment. It's very important because it tells them that they have a choice. It tells them that they really do have a voice and their voice matters, and you're just not saying that to get over with the pad. Because we do have a client that when we first started talking to, which is called Client X, Paul and I would talk about groups, specifically Paul would talk about a group, and the client was like, you know what, like I'm not interested, change this topic and what have you. And later on, you know, this person has been in guardianship for a while and has been quite isolated at home. And now, after talking with Paul and I, and because we respect his choices along the way, he's the one that came forward and say, hey, you know, about that group, I would like to do it. You know, my schedule doesn't align with it, but I'm gonna try my best. And now he has attended the group and he really enjoys it, and it's moving forward in his life and making choices that will lead to a life that is genuine to him.
Thank you, Claudia. I must say, every time one of you guys speaks, it's not better than the next, but it's so enlightening. And so thank you for that. Claudia, I heard you say, of course, the pad is not an end unto itself. Your work doesn't end with the pads. It really is a life choice situation. Paul, how does that resonate with you and the people you've worked with in Texas?
I do think it's the work itself is a process. You look at where you've been, where you are now, and where you want to go. And the pad encompasses all of that. It encompasses where you've been, and then where you're now, and how you want to, what you want to keep about now, and where you want to go with your life. And for many people, it's a process that they deal with experiences that they've never had the opportunity to deal with. You're going to bring up stuff that nobody talks about, nobody engages in, it's not polite conversation. Nobody wants to discuss this stuff, and it comes up in the pad, and people go, wow, you know, and they go, how can we deal with this, you know? So it's a process that's, and being a peer, it changes things. So if I was not a peer, people couldn't speak with me. I mean, my years as being a peer, I've learned that you actually have to have some kind of credibility before people will trust you. It's like, I'm not talking to you, you know, and it's like, well, you know, I can give them a diagnosis or a certification or whatever. They don't trust you. You actually have to build a rapport and a connection with people where they'll trust you, and then we'll work with you, you know. So not everyone is going to want to make a pad or want to make one now, but the ones who connect with you and then go, yeah, I do trust you, I connect with you, and this is, you know, and then you can put their voice in a document that can be respected.
So are you saying, Paul, I think you are, that the pad process itself, putting aside the external environment for a second, is a growth and learning process that
the pad process itself, yes, yeah. It's the whole process of making the pad. You can go to a hospital and come out with 12 medications. You don't know what you've got or what you're for or whatever. But when you do a pad, you put all these down and you're listing it and organizing it, and you're knowing the ones you did, I don't think so, and the ones that, you know, I wouldn't mind to be on that one. It's like you're organizing your life, all the medications you've been through, the treatments you've been through, what worked, what didn't, what you'd like to try, what worked. I'd like that. You know, I didn't do that, but I'd like to do that. These
And
are
have you
things put in
seen that? Have you seen that learning in the people you've worked with in creating pads?
Yeah.
Pads?
Yeah. And the thing about pads is you know, I work with Claudia, who's much younger than myself, but I've known people for a long time, and you could be in the mental health system for 30 years, and people don't see you on the radar for a long time, and they think, oh, you know, he's got it all made, but you never know what's going to happen to you. You might have some kind of accident or some kind of chronic health condition, or you might lose your support network or your insurance. And then the next thing you know, you're having a mental health crisis and you're in a hospital and nobody knows you and they don't know what works for you. They don't know, you know, I've been doing the same thing and this works for me. They don't know that. And if you're not able to communicate it, they don't know. And they just have ignorance, which becomes neglect. But it's not neglect because you can't communicate it. Your pad communicates for you. It is your voice. You say where you've been, what's going on with you, and how to help.
That's excellent, Paul. Thank you. I think I'm going to skip over the cat. The cat wanted to get in at one point, but I'm going to skip over the cat and go to where I'm told. Usually I go to where I'm told, but I think I was either supposed to introduce a video or go to Ellen Sachs. Would somebody help me with my directives?
Video. The short video, I think it's about a minute, and then we'll have Ellen close the day.
Okay, I'm going to give Ellen a moment. If you want to react to any of these comments, Ellen, or should we just go to the video?
Let's go to the video, and then I'll talk about my talk.
Okay, before we do that, I want to say you guys are amazing. That was really a dynamic and interesting discussion. I feel we could have gone on much longer. I apologize if I cut you off at any point, but it's terrific food for thought. I'd like to introduce the video now, and I'd like to say thank you to the panelists in particular for allowing me to have this dialogue with you today. Thank you.
The power of choice is sacred. In the most basic sense, we are a collection of the choices that we make. PADS, or Psychiatric Advance Directives, is a legal rights document that gives you the ability to outline what kinds of mental and physical health treatments you'd like to receive in the event of an emergency. Whether we're talking about the ability to choose to vote for someone in an election or our right to choose what we want to eat for lunch that day, the power of choice is a basic human function that should be afforded to everyone. PADS gives you the ability to make your choices and decisions known to treatment providers and others who may want to choose for you. PADS differ and vary from state to state, so please familiarize yourself with your local and state laws for more information. Remember, you are your choices, and no one should be able to take away your power to choose.
Professor Sachs.
Professor Sachs, thank you so very much. I want to take a brief moment to thank all of the panelists discussing this important issue of SDM and PADS. Just as an aside, on the implementation question with PADS, some years ago I was being interviewed or examined to get some kind of physical health treatment, and the examiner said, do you have an advance directive or a durable power of attorney? And I said, yes. And she didn't ask what it was or where she could find it or anything else. It was just a formality. So the implementation question is an interesting question. I think the topic for today is very important and very meaningful. As shown, for example, by, there's a legal mental health law organization here in LA called Mental Health Advocacy Services, and they've reached out and said, how can we help with this project? Can we do some of the interviewing ourselves and that kind of thing? And just the idea that with our innovation project, more and more counties are saying they want to be part of it. So this is a product that I think is gaining some traction and people are quite interested in it. I think we're hopeful that our projects on SDM and PADS lead to a place where more patients, as I've said, make decisions with their supporters and thus resume being the architects of their own lives. That's just so important. Having had my choice taken away from me, it's very important. So we're going to keep you posted and hope to have another symposium on these issues, basically discussing our findings. I also want to shout out a thanks to the people who have made this event happen. Chris Schneiders, the director of the Sachs Institute, couldn't be a better director, and our events office, in particular, Leila Landers. Thank you, Leila. So thank you again for your, also mention again that there will be the Q&A event on Thursday, May 13th, and we hope to see you all at that time. So thanks again for your interest in and support of this work that can really change the landscape of decision-making among those with lived experience of mental illness. Again, thank you for coming.